Andrew Eborn is joining me today. He's a barrister, and we're going to talk also about AI. There's a lot of warnings about AI and where it leads, actually.
Well, it might. We might all lose our jobs.
Well, I think it's a little more sinister.
You're both going to lose your jobs if you keep banging the desk.
I'm sorry.
AI would not do that. And, today it's David Bull next. All here. It's Talk TV.
This is Talk TV.
Straight talking, no nonsense, and annoying all the right people. This is Talk TV.
Hello, a very good morning to you. It is just after 7 o'clock on Sunday, May the 7th. Thank you very much indeed for your company. I'm David Bull, resplendent in my Union flag waistcoat, I think you will agree. Right, some really, really great news. I'm being told, even though it looks absolutely like Armageddon out there, it's going to be apparently 21 degrees in parts of Britain today. Oh, yes, indeed. Sizzle, sizzle. There are just 45 days to go until summer, and I can get my Speedos out.
Your summer station. Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
And there are just 232 days to go until Christmas, by the way, and 2 days until I am yet another year older. Yes, indeed. I shall be 98.
Hey, birthday boy. Ooh, booby doo.
I didn't know that was coming. Right, let's start today's show, shall we?
Today's fascinating facts.
Well, it's all going tremendously well this morning, isn't it? So let's start today's show with our three fascinating facts. Let me tell you, on this day in 1663, the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane in London, built by Thomas Killigrew, opened. It opened, actually, under a royal charter granted by King Charles II. On this day in 1765, HMS Victory. Now, that was the ship that actually became the flagship of Admiral Horatio Nelson. It was actually launched at Chatham in Kent. Now, here's a little piece of factual information which I learnt when I was doing Coronation Breakfast yesterday. Part of HMS Victory was actually used to form the top of the Diamond Jubilee State Coach, and that obviously was used yesterday. And on this day in 1959, British Rail announced plans to close 230 stations, and those are today's fascinating facts.
Today's fascinating facts.
We got there in the end. Another fascinating fact. I'm joined today by Andrew Eborn, barrister extraordinaire. Good morning.
Extraordinaire. It's so good to see you. And can I say what a delight it was to see you on television yesterday.
That's very sweet.
Resplendent you were in your morning suit. I was so pleased to see you. It's got
we talked a great deal in Talk TV Towers about the sort of right tone for that, and actually a morning suit seemed the right thing to wear.
I was looking for your invitation. I assumed you were going to be up there with Penny Mordaunt and the glorious outfits.
I mean, she looked spectacular.
Wasn't she good?
She really was absolutely brilliant, actually. And I thought the whole... I mean, I don't know what your view of the coronation was, and actually, I wonder if we've got some pictures. So yesterday, I hosted Coronation Breakfast. It was a great... I thought, you know, despite the British weather, it was actually a marvellous celebration of everything.
I was absolutely, and I was looking for the headline. I predicted the headline would be "Long to Reign Over Us," but they missed that. They missed a trick. You see, they missed a trick.
Well, in fact, the front pages this morning are all full of great plays on words as well. But that is a particularly good one. This one, the Sun, obviously, I think is particularly good. It says crowning glorious good. Now,
every single, as you say, every single one of the papers, the Sunday Times, same sort of picture, glorious picture of. I think every single one is going to be wonderful. What I loved about it was actually during the ceremony, I had the joy of going down to Hyde Park and mingling with the people as you do. And I paid. I've got a double mortgage on my apartment just to buy a sort of a bratwurst in a bun. It's got to be good. But what I loved about it is the people, that just everybody getting dressed up and totally into the spirit. The British people and people from around the world who just come together to celebrate this glorious moment.
So I was talking to Claire in makeup this morning, and she was saying that she was on the tube on the way home, and then there were a group of ladies absolutely drenched but loving it, and they were sharing their photos and everything, and that was the real sense I got. I mean, actually yesterday was extraordinary. I was in the green room obviously after doing the show, and I had all sorts of people in there. You know, Sharon Osbourne was there because of course she was doing the show afterwards with Vanessa. Yes, indeed. And so I had a cheeky kiss with Sharon yesterday whilst I gave her a glass of fizz. And then also David Emmanuel was there, of course.
How's he doing?
He's really well. He's really well. So it was nice to see him, and we talked about obviously Princess Diana's, or Lady Diana Spencer's, wedding dress. So it really was a brilliant day.
Wonderfully unifying is what I found, and I think I managed to go down to Hyde Park and saw it on the screens, and not as big, I have to say, as the Crown or the different screens that they had for Her Majesty the Queen's funeral, where it was packed out in Hyde Park. In Hyde Park this time, it was fairly empty, I have to say, and I'm sure weather had a lot to do with it.
I'm sure. I mean, obviously, those sort of things. I mean, we used to have a saying, particularly when I was doing A&E, that rain is the best policeman, because obviously it does keep people away, particularly in carnivals and so on. But actually, I just got the sense, and I was thrilled, actually, to see the numbers in the Mall. Yes. Because imagine if, actually, people hadn't turned out.
But interesting, I think they locked them in. From what I read, is that 9 o'clock, whoever's in there in the Mall, from 9 o'clock until 2 o'clock, you weren't allowed to get out or anybody else get in. So it really was they kept them in there for all that sort of time.
Well, and this comes on to a much bigger issue, I think, in terms of the policing, and we can talk about this, and we will talk about it in just a minute. But just in terms of this new act that's gone through, this is the Public Protection Act, obviously. We saw all of these arrests very early on in the day. Just Stop Oil. We also saw Extinction Rebellion as well, and also other Republic, for example, also being arrested, the leader of that group. Where do you stand on the use of those powers? Because part of me thinks, well, this is a country of free speech, but at the same time, I understand the balance and keeping the rest of the public safe.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think it totally is a question of free speech, but within the law. And I think what's happened is people have abused that right to free speech, and they're breaking the law. We've been on this very programme talking to all sorts of people from Extinction Rebellion and the tactics that they use. They're in breach of the rules already. My concern is that we may be going too far, and I think people have the right to protest. They have the right to say, not my king, if they want to say that. Maybe not the most appropriate thing, and the public will speak to them if they don't agree. And I saw, I'm wandering around London as they did, I saw a number of people with their little placards and things like that saying, not my king. There were a few just outside the
but that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
People are allowed to say that, and if the king's going to turn around and say embrace people of all faiths, he can embrace people of all views as well. And I think people are entitled to say that, and thank goodness we live in a country where you are allowed to say that at the moment. So we've got to be very careful. I think it's a slippery slope if we take away our freedom of speech.
It is. At the same time, I'm very mindful of the fact that actually it was a hopefully in a lifetime occasion, and the police were deeply worried. They had intelligence about what was going on. Interestingly, the other day I opened my curtains and looked out, and there's a warship sitting outside my window in Greenwich.
Yes.
This is HMS Diamond.
Right.
And it was brought in to, and I use this advisedly, celebrate the coronation. We can see a picture there. That's a picture I took from my apartment. And that is HMS Diamond, actually. It's our most powerful frigate, and I was actually reading about it this morning. It's a Type 45 destroyer. It has firepower and radars that track missiles and drones. In fact, it can spot a target the size of a cricket ball at 3 times the speed of sound, 250 miles away, and it can guide 16 missiles at the same time. And obviously it was there to protect the capital in the event of a terrorist attack or indeed a strike from another power.
I know, quite right too, and I think you're right. What was the line they fed there to celebrate? I'd like to celebrate by blowing you all up.
No, I'd like to celebrate by bringing in a huge warship.
Absolutely. No, the security behind the scenes, I have to say, was almost seamless, other than there was a huge police presence outside and so on and so forth. And it has to be that the number of the dignitaries from around the world, the global audience, I think they were predicting to be 300 million. You know, would have been rife for those sort of opportunities. So all credit to the security services. And it's right that not only do we have a visible sign of that sort of security, but the invisible side, which I thought was brilliant as well.
I mean, it was extraordinary. I got a briefing from the Ministry of Defence, which was embargoed until midnight or yesterday morning. I mean, it was extraordinary just in terms of the brief. I mean, the briefing is absolutely full. It's 24 pages long, and actually it details in minute detail exactly what would happen, where the troops are, who's leading it, the number of minutes in between each of the people taking part in the procession. I mean, it has been done, or was done, with military precision.
Absolutely. Where the
quite literally.
Absolutely. And it has to be. And isn't that reassuring to everybody? Because you turn around on these sort of occasions and say, look, hang about, we can rest assured that they've got us covered. And I think that's very, very important. So have those visible signs, but the invisible signs working so well as well.
Right, let's move on. I mentioned in my fascinating facts about British Rail closing those 230 stations in. But what was really interesting about this, it then made me think about the Beeching report. Now, obviously, you're not old enough to remember the Beeching.
1963, the 27th of March, remember it well.
That's right. It was the reshaping of British Railways. And if you remember Beeching, so I didn't really understand this, but basically Beeching was tasked with trying to turn British Rail round, to make it more profitable. It was losing a lot of money at that time. I think it was losing something like £100 million a year, which in the 60s was a lot of money. I mean, it's still a lot of money now. But I do wonder whether it was a terrible mistake.
Well, it was a terrible mistake, and I'll tell you why. I mean, the world has moved on. Trains in those days were deemed to be dirty and smoky, rather like the night in Soho.
Well, I remember being able to smoke. Well, not that I smoke, but smoke on a train.
Oh, exactly. And you were only 5 at the time.
Well, I know.
It was also
very progressive.
Absolutely. No, but it was, and that's what he thought. He thought the future of transport was going to be cars, and therefore what's going to happen, we'll close down all these railways. The plan was to basically 5,000 miles of track and 2,000 stations were going to be closed, and it's ripping out the arteries, if you like, of Britain. And what's going to happen now? The world has moved on. Now, more people are obviously, they can't afford cars. So, especially the young, they travel, more and more people by train. And therefore, we need to look at this again and that sort of stuff.
I totally agree. And where I live in Suffolk, actually, you can see where they've ripped up the track so that the station is no longer there. But the thing is, it's essentially still a long straight line. You've still got all of the bridges and everything.
Yeah.
But it would cost so much money to put all of it back. But you're right. Of course, if we're trying to encourage people onto public transport, you need to have public transport in the places where people live.
No, absolutely. And what they have done, I mean, I suppose the good news is for cyclists, they've put in an extra 1,500 miles of cycle tracks, effectively where the railway tracks used to be. So from that point of view, they've turned that around. But you need to look at the principle. You need to look at the mischief he was trying to guard against. Dirty and filthy and that sort of stuff. Smelly is what it used to be. It no longer is. It's some of the cleanest ways to travel, and we need to encourage people back.
And it needs to be cheaper.
It does. It's crazy.
It's really expensive.
Yeah, crazy to go anywhere. It's cheaper to fly abroad than it is to go and travel up on
and
trains.
And that is the wrong message that we're sending
totally
out,
the wrong message. We need to be here. The hearts, there's some glorious places around this wonderful country of ours that people should explore, and they could do if we could make it affordable.
I totally agree. Let's move on and talk about something else, obviously something you're very interested in. I have to say, Ed Sheeran lives near me in Suffolk. And
he owns half the village, doesn't he?
Well, I mean, certainly he's bought a few properties there. But Ed Sheeran, and I was very pleased about this, won this copyright case over the Marvin Gaye song. So for people who don't know what we're talking about, essentially it was alleged that his 2014 song, Thinking Out Loud, actually copied parts of Gaye's 1973 classic, Let's Get It On. So the heirs of songwriter Ed Townsend, who co-wrote that song with Gaye, essentially said he had lifted parts of that material. Now, you and I were talking the other day about this. There are only so many notes. There are only so many chords. So therefore, it's very difficult to prove this, but actually, obviously, they sued him for their own personal reasons. But actually, I'm delighted by that.
Well, I am delighted. But it's understanding what copyright's all about. Now, copyright is like any other property right. It gives you the right to prevent people copying your work, to alter it in any way or to distribute it. But the test is, did he copy it? So you can have independent creation. A judge who was 95 years old, isn't that glorious? 95-year-old Louis Stanton was his name. He basically turned it out and said, look, independent creation is a complete defence. And what Ed did in court, it was a wonderful case where he got his guitar out and he talked about how he came up with this particular song with his co-writer and the story behind it. And the jury, 7 people, with good men and women, true, they basically said, look, they believed him. Yeah. So what they determined is actually he didn't copy it. But Ed's been in court a few times, he's in and out. So, well, I always say where there's a hit, there's a writ.
Well, I think you're right. And also the extraordinary thing about all of this is also, as far as I understand, he actually had used this. He basically performed, didn't he, where he performed certainly a mashup.
Yes.
So he does this a lot, where he takes one song, and the thing is, he used this song, this Marvin Gaye song, and mashed it up. Now, if you'd plagiarised it, you wouldn't have done that.
Well, exactly, and that's the point that he made in front of 20,000 people. It was a concert in 2014 in Zurich, where he did exactly that. He segued into the Marvin Gaye track, and you worked on that sort of basis. He's been in court a couple of times. Last year, he won a case that was taken against him by Sam Chowkhury about The Shape of You, and he looked at that sort of side. And what basically, you might remember that in 2017, Photograph, he actually had to pay out £16 million as a result of a copyright infringement that he lost in that instance. So it happens all of the time. And Gaye's estate itself, you might remember Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams and Blurred Lines. They had to pay $5 million to Gaye's estate because Gaye's got to give it up and so on and so forth. So there's a story of music throughout history is populated with these claims. You've had Chuck Berry and the Beach Boys, Sweet Little 16 and Surfing USA. You've had the Chiffons and George Harrison, even Queen and David Bowie, and remember Ice Ice Baby from Vanilla Ice.
Indeed.
So all of these cases, and history, as I say, Andrew Eborn's greatest writs is what we should do. We could look at these.
We should.
We should look at all these things throughout history. The important point and the real test is, did he copy? If he copied, then you can look on that sort of basis.
But incredibly difficult to prove one way or the other.
Well, this is why you have musicologists who will come in, and what they need to look at, and this is why they basically determine, how did you come up with this song? Yeah. And it was a week of evidence, and he spoke about how he came up with the song, he demonstrated his chord progressions and so on and so forth, and that's what happens. And so it's not just listen to it sound similar, that there's your victory. You have to say, did you copy? And that's what needs to be proved.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Andrew. I'm delighted because he said he would otherwise otherwise give up actually performing.
Absolutely.
So I'm delighted for Ed Sheeran actually this morning. Thank you very much indeed for the moment. Time for a quick break. After the break, Charlie Rowley will be joining us. He's former special advisor to review all of this morning's papers. I wonder what the big story is this morning. This is Talk TV. Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast. I'm David Bull. The time 7:22 on Sunday, May the 7th. Thank you very much indeed for all your messages, which are flooding in at the moment. Good morning, Davy Spice, says Ian in Glasgow. Davy Spice. I like the new wife, but prefer Renee. I'm sorry about that, Andrew.
I understand. I understand.
Anyway, lots and lots of other messages coming in as well. Dan in Kent, one of our regulars. Good morning to you, Dan. Dan says the history of the car versus the train is a really good example of socialism versus capitalism. Beeching read the future without the knowledge of net zero. It's only climate change madness and overpopulation that has us talking about taking the train again. So it's really interesting, actually, because, of course, you can only view history, can't you, at that time. You can't actually retrospectively look at history, I don't think.
No, well, but people do all the time.
Oh,
I always say that history repeats itself because we don't learn the lessons from history. And if you think about it, I say they got it wrong in Beeching because he predicted that cars were going to be the future. There was, from a snap moment, exactly that, but we're now going back. And if you lose that infrastructure, to put it back in place is costing zillions.
Absolutely right. Thank you very much indeed. So the question I want to ask you this morning is a very simple one. Do you have a coronation over? Did you have rather a lot to drink yesterday? What did you do yesterday to celebrate the coronation? What are you doing today as well? Do let us know. The number 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also tweet us at Talk TV, and you can tweet me at Dr. David Bull. It's now time to review this morning's papers. I'm delighted to say Charlie Rowley, former special advisor, joins us this morning. Good morning.
Morning. Hi. Hello to you both.
I wonder what's in the news.
I've struggled. I've struggled.
Well, I bet you have, actually. I mean, just the front page is full, obviously, as you would expect. Amazing headlines, actually, crowning glory and all the rest of it, and wonderful pictures.
That's exactly it. And I was just about to say, if there's any day to go and buy a newspaper today, just for the photos alone, go and do it today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because not just in the papers themselves, but everybody's got a royal supplement, and it's fantastic, and you can relive the whole experience just through those images, which I think are just beautiful.
They really are beautiful. A moment in history, actually. And I think you get the sense of the rich tapestry of history, particularly in this country. And certainly looking back, you know, he was the 40th monarch to be crowned in that building since 1066. I mean, this country oozes history.
It totally does, and it's not just the history; it's about also looking to the future. So when you see the kids, when you see Louis, Charlotte, and George, and just seeing what a ball they were having.
Did Louis get whizzed out because he was yawning?
Well, he was yawning. What I loved is when they did that sort of double take putting on the crown, which both of them, because it was a bit uncomfortable. So the crown sort of went on, and it wasn't quite right. It was going to wobble, so it came off again, and then it went on, and then when Charles was doing the oath, they basically cut to Louis, who did the biggest yawn.
But I love that.
Oh, no, that's what you want, because he was the star, you might remember, during the Platinum Jubilee, when the fly past and he's doing this and he's pulling faces and glorious. That's what we want.
I agree. So, Charlie,
Exactly.
what stood out for you about the coronation? What certainly are the papers saying about it?
Well, I think for me in particular, I think Andrew's just hit the nail on the head. It was that moment of the crown raised above by the Archbishop of Canterbury above King Charles's head, and it was that moment where I think everybody sort of took in a gasp of breath, because King Charles has had the longest time to prepare for this role, his entire life. This has been the longest dress rehearsal running.
He was actually present at his mother's coronation.
Yeah. Yes, and it's to see those images, and to probably it's a bit like the whole life flashing before your eyes, and this is the moment, as I say, that he's been sort of born to do, and it has finally arrived, and it was just that one moment where you're sort of perhaps not the king until that crown is sort of placed upon you.
He looked really very vulnerable, is the word I would use.
So it's really interesting you say this. This is the front page of the Sunday Times,
yes.
And look at the angst on his face. I think this, for me, summarises the weight of office.
Yes.
And I think that's what I found particularly interesting about the whole thing. It was sacred, but and deeply spiritual and very religious. And of course, it's basically his deal with God.
Yes.
He is obviously defender of all faiths. That's why he wants to be known as. Of course, he is also the head of the army. He's head of the armed forces as well, commander-in-chief. So it's an extraordinary role, isn't it?
Exactly so. And you're absolutely right about the armed forces, because it's the first time in a coronation sort of setting where the garden in Buckingham Palace has been used. And after all of the paraphernalia and the big fanfare, all the armed forces or representatives of the armed forces were out in the garden. He obviously went out into the garden after his coronation and gave them a sort of a private sort of nodding of respect before going on to that famous balcony,
yes.
which of course everybody was delighted.
And he did the rock star thing, didn't he? Where he did the balcony thing, and then he left in the same way as sort of James Brown. One more time,
exactly.
And he came out
when
again.
he went back for a curtain call.
Thank you, my people. I love you.
Do you know, I was so thrilled to see so many people in the Mall, because I was concerned, given the weather. We talked about this at the beginning, but I was concerned.
The full feel of that, but I just thought, still up until Friday night. And on the back of a terrible set of local elections for the Tories, which I'm sure we might sort of touch on.
We're definitely talking about that later, yeah.
But when you still think that there was a division in the country, when you were indicated earlier, when you still got conversations about the monarch, whether it's New Zealand, whether it's Australia, whether it's Canada, maybe sort of now sort of breaking away because of the passing of the late Queen, you kind of think, oh gosh, we don't have that one unifying figure still in Her Majesty the Queen, until yesterday, when you're seeing the whole pomp and ceremony, to see King Charles there.
Nobody does pomp and ceremony better than us here in the UK. I mean, the world audience, if you remember, the last coronation 70 years ago, it brought in the dawning of the age of television. It was the first time that television audiences superseded the radio audiences. So it was wonderful seeing that sort of stuff and unifying us again.
And that's exactly the key word, just bringing the country together, regardless of what is going on in life. And for Camilla as well, because obviously the history, we all know about that, but just to see her as the Queen now, and to see them together, and to see those little looks that they exchange, and particularly on the balcony. They were an elderly couple, it's right to say.
Elderly couple in their 70s.
But
yes.
they were enjoying life, and you could just tell that they value each other so
I
much.
never thought we would see this, ever.
Yeah.
And we've had people calling in saying that they couldn't watch it because they didn't like the way that, obviously, Princess Diana was treated and all the rest of it. But actually, in terms of this, and you mentioned the television, 26 million people watched the late Queen's coronation in this country. There were only 36 million in the country.
I know.
And what are we now, 67 million?
And interesting, because most people didn't have a television set in those days, so the average number of people watching a set was 9. I did something for the Royal Television Society, you know, I do their podcast, thank you. And so we looked at that whole sort of coverage then, and obviously people like ITV weren't even around in those days. But you're right, those sort of pictures, which is wonderful. And the glorious phrase we haven't mentioned yet is, I come not to be served, but to serve, is what he's sort of saying. So it really is, this is about sort of sovereignty and sovereignty for the people. He's there to be our king. And I have to say, the walkabouts that they did, even from the Dog and Duck down in Soho, went on forever. The wall-to-wall television coverage.
I thought that was a masterstroke, actually, the Dog and Duck, and I thought they looked very at home. And I love what William said. You know, he said, I'm much better at drinking these pints than pulling them.
Well, actually, they said he was quite good at pulling the pint, because do you remember Charles or whatever it was? I think Boris did one, and it had far too much head. And it worked on that sort of place, but he pulled a fine pint, they said.
Yeah, I mean, it really is extraordinary. Because I was working yesterday, I haven't had time to actually watch it thoroughly, and I want to sit down and watch it from beginning to end to see those nuances. You know, I talked about the fact that Victory is used to carve the top of that Diamond Jubilee coach and things like that. So the real sense of history throughout the whole of the coronation, I find really extraordinary.
And I think that was, I think everybody felt that yesterday because of all those little nuances and all those little key facts that we had obviously not known before, were obviously wheeled out yesterday. And I just thought it was a beautiful thing to bring the whole country together. And we haven't even sort of touched on things like Penny Mordaunt. That was a bit of a storm. She was
wonderful.
Tell us about Penny Mordaunt.
Well, the interesting thing is because she's a leader of the House of Commons, but as part of that role in the cabinet, it's your the chief sort of Privy Councillor, and so it's essentially in any other given day or year, you're basically sort of just in the cabinet, but it's a low-ranking ministerial role. And she was put there because she was a former challenger, I think, you know, under Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak.
That's right.
So a role that should not really be seen. And of course, she's had over the last year this front and centre role.
Well, I was about to say, so she was there when the King signed, and then when he went, this pen doesn't work. But so she was there, and then yesterday she played a pivotal role.
She did, and she had because it's a role fulfilled carrying the royal sword as she did gallantly yesterday, which is not light, I'm led to believe. And she's been doing press ups, I was told,
is
to
right?
get in training. So she was preparing, and she's obviously a Navy Reserve herself, so she takes these things very, very seriously, as she should. But she had a fabulous new dress design because no female had.
I think she won the prize. And a lot of people said that she won the fashion prize. Another fascinating fact about both Penny and Charles and their connection is actually magic. Because Penny, when she was growing up, used to be a magician's assistant.
Yes, she did.
And King Charles is a member of the Magic Circle. He had to take his... I think, as I did. Every week, Chaz and I are down the old rubber duck.
So I didn't know that. He's a member of the
Magic Circle. And there's a glorious thing. When I take you to the Magic Circle, it is open to the general public. You can see the original cups and balls that he did, because everybody had to do an exam before they can get in. So the original cups and balls are there. And actually, Lord Louis Mountbatten was greatly into magic and things like that as well. So he started quite young, and there's a great fascination. But he is a member of the Magic Circle, and a very proud member too.
Absolutely.
Well, it was certainly magical yesterday.
Well, it certainly was, and also he's a man of many talents. He plays the piano, he plays the cello,
he speaks German.
He plays the guitar, he speaks German, he speaks French. I mean, amazing. Let's move on then. Obviously, wall-to-wall coverage, isn't there, really, of the coronation everywhere. Of course, it continues over the weekend.
It does, and absolutely, and I shall certainly be continuing the celebrations, hopefully this weekend.
What are you doing?
Well, I just wanted to go into, funny enough, I'm just going to go with a couple of friends into central London just to absorb, as I did last night, the people that have come from far and wide to camp out and to sort of, that's when I think, when you meet people who just want to be here, so, and you remember, you're reminded constantly why, because we take this country for granted, I think. We take all the good things for granted so often. So to hear from people that have not necessarily based in London or have come from far and wide, to just hear how great the ceremony is.
So I actually walked the processional route a few days before I did the show yesterday, because I wanted to do exactly that, to understand the processional route, but also to see the crazy people who are camping out. But the spirit and it was just wonderful, actually.
Yes. Yeah, a fantastic feeling. And exactly, there's nothing greater than the people to get that unified. And they came from all over the world. I met a number of people who'd flown in especially for the coronation. They're here for a few days. And the boost to the economy, people say about the cost of it, everything else, the boost to the economy is paying tenfold, I think, on that basis.
And it is the camaraderie. I mean, I don't want to keep talking about the late Queen, but I remember queuing up for her funeral and going. And it was in those queues where you made those friends of, with people who, again, come from far and wide to pay their respects. But they did it because of the love for the monarch. They did it for the love of this country. And I think, you will never see this potentially again, and in that kind of spirit. So I'm looking forward to
absolutely. And of course, the Commonwealth, 54 countries, makes up a third of the world's population.
Yes.
Let's not forget that. He's also head of state of 14 other countries. So in fact, this wasn't just a day for the United Kingdom. It was actually a day for, a third of the world, actually.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And of course, as part of the coverage as well, you've got things about the protesters, and you've got things about Liverpool Football Club, booing during the national anthem when they played yesterday. But I don't think that's worth dwelling on at all. I think this is a minority group of people who, and I actually, the police get a rough ride, and rightly so at times, for some of the things that go on within the Metropolitan Police. But I am fully supportive of the police in the action that they took yesterday, and the way in which Sir Mark Rowley was very clear that we will have a much lower tolerance of any kind of disruption and disturbance.
Rowley and Rowley, they're both there.
Of no relation, I'm afraid. I'm not related. No, I'm not related to him. I'm sort of I'm absolutely championing him today. He's not my dad. So don't worry.
That could have been very helpful. You never know. You never know. I mean, I'm also hugely supportive of the police, and of course, the point was that they're there to protect the vast majority. We were talking earlier about HMS Diamond parked in Greenwich, our most advanced warship. They took this very seriously.
Yes.
And you have to. I mean, absolutely, don't you?
Totally. And just because of everybody there that was enjoying themselves and the risk, it is too great a risk to allow, whether it's just horses being spooked or whatever. You just don't want to take the shine off what is going to be and what was a brilliant day for everybody here and around the world.
It's testament to brand GB that both the visible and the invisible stuff worked so well.
Yes,
it went without any major incident, and that's because the invisible stuff, it was a wonderful roaring success on every other basis.
Oh, totally. And from a sort of, I remember sort of looking at security things before, sort of in government, and you just the level of, as you say, people that would have been faded into the background, and those streets, you wouldn't have just seen the guards and guardsmen sort of lining the streets along with Metropolitan Police, the sort of behind-the-scenes plainclothes police that would have been throughout that whole mile. So the numbers of people that are involved in that security operation will be a lot greater than what's been reported.
Well, I say congratulations to all of them. They did an amazing job. Let's move on and talk about something else. And almost got overshadowed, actually, the local elections, of course.
Thank goodness.
well, yes, talk us through that. I mean, I was looking at the results in terms... I mean, Labour is spinning that this was a great triumph for them. I don't think it was. And also the Conservatives, I mean, there's no doubt it was a miserable night for them.
I think that's right, and it definitely wasn't a great night for the Conservatives, and losing over 1,000 seats, which was predicted, but you want to try and make sure that
already at an all-time, well, not an all-time low, but they were already low.
Well, exactly, and on this particular set of elections, it lost 1,300 seats 4 years ago, and this is the same group, so it's on a downward trajectory in that sense. So it wasn't a good night to be a Conservative, but I think that's absolutely right. I think the Labour Party needed to do, I think, a lot more, and they needed to win a hell of a lot more places to ensure, if they're going to use that statistic, to make sure that they're over the line for the next general election.
It's the standard narrative, isn't it? You sort of turn on, if you know you're going to have these massive defeats and you're predicted great wins, then you're going to go down somewhere.
Yes.
So it's the standard Clinton approach to everything. You say it's going to be far worse than it actually turns out to be, or it's going to be much better than that sort of stuff. I think Labour got it wrong, because I think they were expecting it to be much better than it actually was.
I think so. And there is a worry, and this is reflected in some of the papers today, there's a worry that this is a Neil Kinnock moment, sort of overplaying the success. And I can understand why the Labour Party will do it, because they want to try and seize, momentum's probably the wrong word for the Labour
Definitely
Party,
the wrong word.
But they want to try and seize the moment to take over the narrative that people are up and down the country moving to the Labour Party. They have done in certain places, that's true, but not in enough to win a general election, which is why they want to try and force people's hand to get over the line.
So that's the key thing. They are spinning this, but actually it might give them a majority, but not enough, not a big enough working majority.
Exactly. They will be the largest party, but they won't form a majority government, which is why we've been hung parliament territory again. Now, the question to the public is, do you want to see another hung parliament? Do you want to see a coalition between perhaps the Labour and the Liberal Democrats?
And the other question is whether it sort of now galvanises the support for the Tories. You turn and say, look, this is how terrible it is. If you don't get out and vote and help, there's that sort of stuff. What do you think will help them to persuade people?
Well, I think for this particular set of elections, I think there were just three things that really sort of went wrong, and I think it's the first time that people have been able to demonstrate in the ballot box their discontent for politics and Parliament and the current government, particularly over the politics of last year with Boris Johnson and Liz Truss and all the shenanigans that were going on there. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think the second is that ask anybody and any poll that's conducted, what is the number one issue of this country? It's the cost of living crisis.
Absolutely.
And people don't feel at the moment that they are feeling that pound in their pocket. They don't feel the economy is getting any better.
Well, they've been taxed the highest tax burden in 70 years. I mean, the Conservative Party really ought to learn to be conservative.
Well, this is the success of the Conservative Party has always been because it's been able to adapt to the time and and deliver on against whatever the challenges that they face. But I think when people get through the other side of what has been a terrible economic time, people want to make sure, as you rightly say, they've got more money, disposable income to spend, that they're seeing their public services actually run effectively and value for money. And so I think there has to be a shift before the next election where there is a tax cut for particularly middle income and lower earners.
And there is time to do that, and that's the whole point, isn't it?
But it's so cynical, isn't it?
Well, it's cynical but realistic, isn't it?
Well, isn't the idea that you actually should have some beliefs and principles? That's the thing that annoys me, is the fact is that they have gone against all of their principles, blaming Liz Truss, and actually I don't think it was entirely Liz Truss. And then, of course, they will then give you a tax cut before the election. Everyone feels good, and therefore they are trying to buy your vote.
Well, I think I'm sympathetic to a lot of that, because I think the problem with Liz Truss is that she got, I think, some of the policies right, not necessarily the top rate of income tax, and not understanding sort of you need to have forecasts and you need to bring business with you, and it was
it was all a bit much too quickly.
Exactly so. But the idea of going for growth, having a lower tax economy in this country, allowing people to sort of have that opportunity to grow a business, to have that income that's people's income. You need to be ambitious after the years of great state intervention. Rightly so, in my view, sometimes because of COVID. But you needed some of that. But you need to pay that down. But in order to do that, you need to be open, energetic, innovative, and you do need to go for growth. And so there is a mismatch as to what direction the Conservative Party should take at the minute, I think. But, because there is that paranoia of the budget last year. Nobody wants to, see the economy.
But remember, I think the writing was on the wall. The great and the good didn't want her. I mean, the thing is that the Conservative members voted for her, and everyone at the top did everything they could to get rid of her.
Well, she didn't always help herself. I mean, I do remember I was in the studio actually when I think she gave a press conference when the markets were going all over the place, and I think it was a sort of quick turn up 8-minute speech, and then she didn't take any questions and left. Now that doesn't inspire confidence when you need.
So you would have advised her, take the questions.
Absolutely, yes, yeah, and just stick it through. And you can be not a great communicator, but if you deliver, people will respect you for the decisions you take if you do stick with them and just explain. And that's
people
what she
like vulnerability, actually, to admit she's not a great communicator, but actually to be very sincere in her beliefs would be good. But you need proper people like yourself around her to brief her on what the key messages are.
Absolutely. And very quickly, you can't extrapolate these, really, can you? Because local elections are very difficult. People vote on potholes, they vote on services, they vote on all sorts of things. Lib Dems do terribly well in local elections. That doesn't necessarily translate.
Exactly so. And I think there was a lot of local politics going on in these local elections. They do matter because people do value their local services, and I think there might be in some Conservative areas where there's been Tory administrations a lot longer than 13 years, like the national government's been in. Places like Plymouth, losing Plymouth, I think the Tory council leader decided to cut down 100 odd trees, which didn't go down very well.
Against the wishes of the residents.
Exactly. Yeah. So local politics was at play, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I remember in 2014 when Ed Miliband had a very good set of local elections. The Tories won it outright majority in 2015. In 2019, when Theresa May, as I say, lost over 1,300 of these council seats, get the big calls right, you go and win on 80-seat majority in 2019. We've lost a huge set now. If Rishi Sunak can really articulate the problems that this country faces and can bring people with him, then who knows, it's all to play for at the next general election.
All to play for.
Yeah,
I like that.
Coming up after the break. It's all to play
Thank
for.
you so much. Time has beaten us, but thank you. It's been a great pleasure to have you here, so thank you.
And
always good to see
always
you.
enjoy coming in. And
Well, come in again.
Thanks,
Charlie, thank you very much indeed. That's Charlie Rowley, who is former special advisor. Time for a break. After the break, it's your turn. Your calls, your thoughts and your messages. What are you doing to celebrate the coronation today? Let us know. This is Talk TV. Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast with me, David Bull. The time 7:48 already on Sunday, May the 7th, this Coronation weekend. Thank you very much indeed for all your messages. This one from Clayton in Dartford. Dr. Bull, did Tim Brooke-Taylor bequeath you his waistcoat?
Hey.
It's very rude, isn't it? Andrew Eborn joins me this morning, a barrister extraordinaire. That's a bit rude, isn't it?
Well, actually, Tim Brooke-Taylor said a lovely thing. He could well have bequeathed you his...
Well, he may well have done
I
that.
like the Spice Girl reference, however. I
Did
thought
you?
that
Davy
was
Spice?
glorious. Yeah,
yes,
Davy Spice
quite
is
like
good,
that.
yeah.
I mean, lots of messages coming in as well. John in Lincolnshire, one of our regulars. Good morning, Dr. David. I missed the 1953 coronation as a boy. I was in Ceylon. I made it up for it yesterday by making coronation chicken for early lunch, washed down with bubbly, and then I had coronation quiche at tea time with friends. Best of both. What a celebration. I have to say, I tried the coronation quiche.
Yes.
Spinach and broad beef.
It's weird, isn't it? I love the tarragon.
I thought it was a bit wet.
It is a bit wet, and lots of people talk about soggy bottoms, which they tried to do it. What my favourite bit about the coronation quiche, however, was that the advisor was the royal chef, who was called Mark Flanagan, which I thought was fantastic.
Yes,
you know, he's going to come up
good.
with a quiche.
Well, I talked to Alto Zilli about it yesterday,
yes.
and he was saying it's, you know, well, the king was very keen to have something sustainable, obviously, that, you know, with his environmental credentials, but at the same time, the idea was it was a sharing plate, that you can have it hot or cold. I mean, I prefer coronation chicken.
I have to say it's a better legacy. I can't see coronation quiche being a regular hit in your stores
No,
soon.
absolutely right. And of course, you see the curry that we eat in this country anyway is not authentic from India.
It's the same with all food around the world. They adapt it to the local tastes, I think.
Exactly.
On that sort of basis. No, I think coronation chicken is the joy.
But curry was introduced for Queen Victoria because she was Empress of India, and of course they had to find a dish that would suit her palate.
Yes.
And so therefore they changed it. They changed the recipe.
Yeah, and quite right too. I think if you are a monarch, you're allowed to change recipes around the world.
Lots of messages coming in. Bill Hammond in Ipswich, my neck in the woods. Bill says, when the crown was raised, Blair turned green with envy.
Oh,
I don't think we should comment on that. Brian says, can we please stop saying we're possibly not going to see this again? The king is old already. He's 74, yeah. Right. I'm only 40. I hope I'll see another one. Well, I mean, yeah, you make a very good point indeed. I was just talking for myself, really. Good morning, David. Events like the coronation, says Natasha, another of our regulars. Good morning. Events like the coronation, seeing thousands of ordinary people proud to be British, just shows the enormous gulf between so much of the media, apart from talk, obviously, and the nation, which would have us believe we're in an awful country. It was so heartening and uplifting to know most people love the UK. I agree with that.
I totally agree with that. We always fast to rubbish everything in the news, and something that's having a good story that brings us all together is fantastic. And we should celebrate being British, celebrate our heritage, our pomp and circumstance, the envy of the world. 300 million people tuned in to watch the coronation. Fantastic.
But we're really good at putting ourselves down, aren't we? It's a very British trait. So it's going to be terrible. And then actually we do like it.
Yeah, we spoke about this. We resent success in this country, don't we?
So that's a really interesting point, actually. And when I lived in America, you and I were talking about this the other day. In America, I sort of, when people say, what do you do? I said, I'm David, I do, you know, this and that. But the thing is, in the States, they very much celebrate, I'm this, I'm a very, very important professor, or whatever it is. So the US is all about celebrating how brilliant you are. In the UK, we underplay.
We totally underplay, don't we? And it's all be yourself because everybody else is taken. I think you have to celebrate your success. If you don't believe in yourself, who else is going to believe in you?
I agree. And we should celebrate what is a wonderful country. Let's take some calls. Calls and thoughts and messages, please. Keep all of those coming in. Joining us on the line is Pat from Suffolk. There is a Suffolk mafia going on this morning.
We love it.
Good morning, Pat.
Hello, Pat.
Good morning, good morning. Yeah, history, I think, will tell, will say, I should say, that the Charles and Camilla was, he's now and was the greatest love story of this century.
Wow.
People bang on about, Diana this, Diana that. She wasn't the saint that everyone's made out to be.
Absolutely.
I know one or two people who knew her and knew a bit more about what went on, but history will tell that. But as I said, when you think Charles met Camilla, I think he was in his early 20s, wasn't it? And basically, they fell in love then. Unfortunately, circumstances held them apart, partly family duties, etc., partly the fact, I think, that obviously, we all have to progress on. But obviously, when they did sort of fall in love again, or really, then they've kept themselves together. They haven't done anything outrageous or anything else like that. As I said, is on the Christo show. I sort of heard they were talking about, she could have spilt the beans on this and that and whatever. So I think that they've kept themselves. Charles sometimes puts his foot in it, but didn't his father. But as I said,
quite.
But as I said, history will tell. There'll be sort of films about this and sort of Netflix series about this in sort of 30-20 or something about the fact that this great love story and everything else, etc. Can I make one point about the protesters?
Indeed.
It's funny how the great and the good all come out about the police. They're being this, stormtroopers, etc., etc. They said nothing about the fact that when the eco-protesters and all that lot were basically blocking half of London up, that when people tried to do something about it, the police stopped them. In fact, I think some nearly got arrested. So it's all right to it's all right to protest about this and that and other. But if you don't like what we're protesting about, you're not a nice person. As I said, it went off basically very smoothly. The rain, unfortunately, made it put the slight down on it.
Yeah.
But as I said, it's become almost history now, because virtually every the recent coronations, it's always been raining.
Well, absolutely right, Pat. Thank you for your thoughts on the coronation. Interestingly, and we talked about the difference here, I'm nervous about the new bill that gives police more powers. It has to be used wisely, I think. I mean, Stephen Millings also messaged in saying, wasn't it wonderful to see the police do their job yesterday and arrest those idiots prior to the ceremony? It was not my protest.
Oh, very funny.
Yeah, very good. But don't you think, I get the sense that actually most people are supportive of the police?
I think, and yesterday was testament to that. I think you have to be very, very careful, as I mentioned beforehand. There is a balance between your right to freedom of speech and also your right to protest, but also to stay within the law. And we can take it too far. If they did stamp in before there was an issue, then that does become...
So interestingly, also, Tony in Liverpool has just messaged in saying, David, foreign media networks were heavily reporting about the crackdown on the Republicans yesterday. Yes. We are not North Korea, so a different viewpoint.
Yeah, and there will be, and that's why it's very interesting how the footage is controlled. And we maybe come on to that, and the BBC in their feed and ITV in their feed, and what happens, and the discussions that take place between the
So this was really interesting, because we didn't know whether we were allowed access to that live feed, actually, for a long time, and the BBC was really being quite offensive, I think, in terms of... I mean, actually, the BBC doesn't own the coronation.
Well, and this is the point, because people won't necessarily know the story, which is why it's worth unpacking, is that you get the BBC will turn around and do what's called a clean feed, which will then get supplied to broadcasters around the world. Also,
which they gave to all the foreign media.
There you go. And also ITV.
For nothing.
This is the point you've got to make, absolutely. And ITV had a similar thing, which they sold around the world. So Talk TV and other stations as well were effectively held over a barrel, as I understand. Is that right?
I think so. I think we have to defer to the lawyers. But anyway, we sorted it out, and luckily we got the feed. Right, let's move on. Angela, one of our regulars in North Yorkshire. Good morning to you.
Hello, good morning, Dr. David.
Good morning. How are you on this fine coronation weekend?
She sounds wonderful, Angela. Good morning.
I'm fine, thank you, because it's warm and sunny up here in North Yorkshire. Well, it was yesterday, anyway.
You should see the weather here. It looks absolutely dreadful, yet again.
And I just wanted to question whether it's a new wife or husband, but you don't have to answer.
No. Oh, I see. So I've had lots of comments about that. I think Dr. Rennie is so upset with me. She disappeared abroad.
I'm just keeping her seat warm, and we get on very well with Rennie. I'll be back in the other chair soon, so it should be good.
Right, what point would you like to make, Angela?
Yes, regarding everything yesterday, I read an article yesterday in the Times. It happened, Janice Turner, and she said today is really a celebration of later life love. And I thought, yes, that really is true. And I think, love conquers all, doesn't it, really? Because, some people have loved it, some people haven't loved it so much. I have some questions about it. I'm a little bit ambivalent, really, because there's a lot of money that's been spent on this, which is actually public money, taxpayers' money. And I do think it would have been a nice gesture if the King could actually put a little bit of money in the pot, you know, just to show willing, really.
It's a good point. It's an interesting point. I mean, I don't know whether he did contribute. I also don't know the final cost. I mean, I don't know. Do you know, Andrew?
Well, the more and more
150 million, 200 million?
And there'll be lots of that sort of stuff. And you have to look at the point I was making earlier, at the impact it has on the economy over here.
Well, exactly.
And there are certain things that they pay for, certain things they don't pay for. That has changed in recent years, and they start paying tax and so on. But Angela makes a brilliant point.
I mean, Angela, just in terms of that, of course, the benefit to the economy is enormous, and we saw all the tourists here. I'm positively in favour.
Does that get as far north as we are, you know? I mean, it does feel very southern-centric, I have to say.
That's really interesting, actually. I mean, I'm hoping that the tourists who are here will then go and tour Yorkshire. Splendid county.
Bring back the railways, that's what you need.
Well, indeed. Angela, thank you very much indeed for your call this morning. Do keep them all coming in. I'm also keen to know what you're doing today for your coronation weekend. I wonder how many sore heads there are after yesterday's entertainment and sacred celebration as well. So we have still much to come on the show. Stay exactly where you are. Andrew, stay where you are as well. This is Talk TV. We're broadcasting live from central London.
This is Talk TV.
My new show is down to earth, it's immediate, absolutely we are shoving home the questions. How are you going to help us through this cost of living crisis? We're on the side of our vibrant viewers.
Good morning, a very warm welcome. It's just after 8 o'clock on Sunday, May the 7th on this coronation weekend. Thank you very much indeed for your company this morning. I'm David Bull. Great news, actually, because it is going to be, apparently, although looking out the window, I'm not quite sure about this, apparently it's going to be 21 degrees in parts of Britain today. Oh, yes, sizzle, sizzle. There are just 45 days to go until summer, and I can get my Speedos out.
Your summer station. Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Oh, not the pictures again. And there are just 232 days to go until Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
That's far too early for that. And there are just 2 days to go until my birthday, and I shall be 98. That's much better. That's much better. Right, let's start today's show with this.
Today's fascinating facts.
Yes, indeed. Today's fascinating facts. On this day in 1663, the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane in London was built by Thomas Killigrew. It actually opened under a royal charter. Now, this is the interesting bit. The royal charter was granted by King Charles II. On this day in 1765, HMS Victory, the ship that became the flagship of Admiral Horatio Nelson, was actually launched at Chatham in Kent. And here's another fascinating fact. Part of the Diamond Jubilee state coach used yesterday was actually fashioned, the very top bit, I think it was a cross actually on the top, was fashioned from HMS Victory. That was used yesterday. And on this day in 1959, British Rail actually announced plans to close 230 stations. In my humble opinion, it was a terrible move and the decimation, or the beginning of the decimation, of the rail network in this country. And those are today's 3 fascinating facts. Lots of messages coming in just very quickly. Good morning, Dr. David says, Lucy, congratulations on yesterday's coverage. I watched all day and I absolutely loved it. Glorious. Listening to you, talking to your guests. Also, she goes on to say, just in terms of children, it's really important to talk to children. It's an old-fashioned idea, but it does indeed work. And this is so true. The state can't run a bath, let alone bring up the nation's offspring. Thank you very much indeed. We've also got this one saying composers from... we were talking about Ed Sheeran earlier, about the fact that he won that court case. Composers have from time to time immemorial used earlier music to inspire new creations. Beethoven actually wrote variations on one of Mozart's arias. Oh, very good. Very impressive to know that. Very good indeed. Lots and lots of others about the police. We've been talking about the new powers that the police used yesterday, cracking down on Republic Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion. Of course, it was a massive police operation. 30,000 police were out yesterday, plus also the armed forces. And as I was saying earlier, they even brought in our most advanced warship, which is sitting in Greenwich at the moment, which can shoot, which is extraordinary. 16 missiles can shoot down objects from something like 250 miles away. I find that absolutely incredible. This one, Paul in Northampton says, David, well done to the Met Police yesterday. Now we need to see the same swift action when Stop Oil, etc., block roads and stop people going to work, school appointments and also to funerals. Keep all of those coming in, please. Also, what are you doing today for the Coronation weekend? Do you have plans? I hope the weather improves. Do you have plans? The number 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. Also, you can tweet us at Talk TV and tweet me at Dr. David Bull. Keep all of those messages coming in. Right. I think it's time to pop over to the United States. It's time for Transatlantic Talk.
Transatlantic Talk with Caroline Faraday.
Yeah! Caroline Faraday! Are you there?
I certainly am.
Hey,
yes.
do you like... Where's
Happy
your union...
day after Coronation.
Thank you, thank you. Where's your union flag waistcoat?
Yeah, I know. I feel really quite left out.
So very importantly, obviously we had this amazing day yesterday. It was triumphant. Of course, the British weather was absolutely abysmal, which you would expect, really. So you're in LA. I know, obviously, there's a big expat community over there. Just in terms of the response there, what was it like being there and not being here?
Well, it was obviously it was a dreadful time of day for watching it live because Los Angeles time it was 3 o'clock in the morning, a little bit later than that if you're on the East Coast, but 3 o'clock in the morning. So very few of us watched it live. I did actually watch it live myself, but very few did. There are some British pubs and that kind of thing scattered about, and they sort of opened up. But to be honest with you, I went to one of them to see whether the punters were really interested in seeing the coronation. And although they had the replays on, most of the folks there were more interested in the football than they were in anything to do with the coronation, I'm afraid.
Oh,
there definitely was a huge curiosity and a huge interest from the American news media. They love our royal family, don't they? So they went all out and they deployed their big juggernauts of news, sent over the, Anderson Coopers and all the main sort of anchors from the big news networks. And they were there sort of generally looking quite bemused by what was going on.
Well, I mean, I'm just seeing some pictures from the news feeds about yesterday. I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary that it went perfectly. I mean, apart from the cloud cover, obviously, and the fly past, which was a real shame. But I mean, just in terms of that, what is it like for you as a Brit, as an expat living over there? Did you feel proud to be British?
I mean, of course, yeah. And you know what? You have to sort of laugh because living in Los Angeles, if you get a drop of rain, and you'll know this from when you lived here, everyone cancels everything. No one does a thing. That is what happens. So to just see the pure Britishness of people in their raincoats still sitting outside having a street party, that's what it meant to be British for me. I was like, yeah, there's nowhere else in the world that would get that.
I totally agree. And I think, people were commenting on the fact that actually the brollies and the colourful brollies actually added to the whole feeling and the festive atmosphere of the whole thing. Let's move on, though. I heard this story this morning. And yet again, it's about gun crime in the United States. They simply haven't got a grip on this. Tell us about this story. 9 people dead in Dallas, just outside of Dallas Mall.
I mean, I say, David, don't I, every time that we catch up at this time, every single week, there is another mass shooting. It's not just every week. It is every single day that these are happening. There are mass shootings happening in the United States. It is May, and there are already over 190 mass shootings in this country this year. Some of them make bigger headlines than others. And this is, there you are on a Saturday afternoon. afternoon and you go to your outlet mall and think you're going to grab yourself a bargain, whether it's a pair of trainers or whatever it is that you might be getting from the outlet mall, with your kids, or with your family, with your friends, and a man gets out of his car with a assault rifle and starts randomly shooting people, and 8 of those people are dead. Another 7 are hospitalized. The youngest one of those is 5 years old. This is in a place called Allen, which is in Texas, just a little bit north of Dallas, a sort of just outside Dallas in Texas there. And it is yet another tragedy, but here we are in the same situation where no one is doing anything, where there are the same barriers being built to making any changes to the gun laws, to the access to guns, to any sort of protections to guns. If anything, it seems to encourage people to get more guns.
I just don't understand the psyche of the American people. I've never understood it.
No. I mean, no. It isn't all the American people. There are strong organizations like the NRA that have a lot of influence in politics and have a lot of influence in parts of America. There are parts of America, Texas being one of them, that do very much like their guns. Having been to Texas, it is not unusual to walk down the street and see people with an AK-47 strapped across their back. It is, as someone who grew up where we grew up, it is so at odds to what we're used to seeing, to what you'd expect. But America does love its guns. It's not prepared to admit that it has a gun problem. They generally consider it to be so entrenched in their right that they are not willing to give that up.
I mean, if anything was to change, it would be under a Democratic president, I assume. I mean, the thing is, if the Republicans get back in, I can't see this changing at all. I mean, I don't see it changing anyway.
No, I mean, they don't have the means to do it anyway at the moment, to put it through there. But, it's frustrating, isn't it? A party that is supposed to be pro-life in so many other aspects doesn't seem to be pro-life once people are actually walking about a shopping mall or going to school. Places where people should be safe. People should have a right to be safe, to know that their kids are at school and will come home, to know that if you go and buy a pair of trainers on a Saturday afternoon, the odds are in your favour for coming home. And the fact that there's such an unwillingness to do anything to change that is mind-blowing, I think.
Just in terms of the media, I mean, the media is very powerful in the States. How are they reporting this? Is there outrage? Is there outcry? What are they saying?
Yes, there is. But you know what? There are so many of these. They go to the top of the news cycle, and there it is. And then the next one comes. You think in the UK, we still talk about what happened in Dunblane, which was, I'm thinking 45 years ago. We still talk about that. And already I was looking at the shootings that have happened this year. Alvaden, Texas, was this year. Are people still talking about that even now? Because you get so numbed to these shocking events that it's yet another one.
It absolutely is. I mean, I just hope they can at some point sort this out, because, I mean, it's just hearing about children being killed is just so horrific. Let's move on and talk about the writers' strike. This is very interesting. I was actually in LA when this happened last time, I think. The writers' strike. So they've gone on strike. These are the script writers, and this is going to affect television, isn't it, in Hollywood?
Yeah, so the way it's set up, Hollywood is a very unionised place. The writers are generally unionised. They're in the Writers Guild of America, and that union has an agreement with the studios, and there is like a set fee for writers, okay? And they're saying, well, hang on, we need our fee increased. I think they're looking for a 6% increase is what they're looking for. And you would think, wouldn't you? Well, writers in Hollywood, they must be paid a fortune. They aren't. You talk to the writers in Hollywood, a lot of them having to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet because it's a gig. They don't get healthcare with it. Well, the union people do, but that's a whole other kerfuffle. But anyway, it is a gig. There's no guarantees of that job. The shows they're writing for now, particularly for the streaming services, are shorter seasons with less guarantees of a job, long hours, punishing duties. They do work, very, very hard, and they are trying to negotiate that. Well, that deal came to an end last Monday, and the writers went out on strike on Tuesday. They had the authority to go out on strike already sort of in place, so most people knew it was coming. Those late night shows, which are really the backbone of television in the evening, of live television, of network television here in the evening, Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, Stephen Colbert, Seth Meyers, all of those shows are currently having to show reruns because their writers are on strike. Saturday Night Live, which is an absolute institution, did not go out. It was supposed to be hosted by Pete Davidson this week, so it was considered to be quite a big deal, Saturday Night Live, and that is a big political show and a big satirical comedy show, such, again, an institution here. That show couldn't go out because they hadn't got any writers. And depending how long they are on strike, the impact will be bigger on drama shows. Interestingly, when you were here before, which was the writer's strike, I think that was around, well, no, it was the one before last, I think. But anyway, 2007, there was a writer's strike, and that one went on for some time. And what the industry ended up doing was looking for shows that didn't need writers. And that really was the birth of reality television and all of the reality television stars.
Wow.
Because they didn't need writers, and it changed the industry really forever in doing that. I mean, all of those reality shows.
Well, I just find it really odd that if you are reliant on writers, surely you should pay them a decent wage, and actually 7% increment doesn't seem that outrageous if the cost, if we've got inflation, at 11 or what, I don't know what it is in the States, but, certainly 11% or thereabouts. It doesn't seem a huge amount, and particularly when they are so reliant on these writers, I find that extraordinary.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the writers would argue that they feel aggrieved to see these big streaming services and the producers making huge amounts of money and bragging about their profits while writers are sort of struggling to make ends meet. I mean, yes, it's not... When you're working on a show, you get paid a decent amount, not nearly those kind of Hollywood amounts you would think someone gets paid, but those are short-term gigs, so that's got to sustain you, and there's no stability to that.
Yeah, well, Caroline, thank you very much indeed, with all your views there on the coronation, also the writer's strike, and, of course, the terribly sad story about yet another gunman, yet more killings, including children, which is just quite extraordinary. That was Caroline Faraday there, live in Los Angeles in the United States, and that was Transatlantic Talk.
Transatlantic Talk with Caroline Faraday.
Right, time for a break. After the break, it's our Future Politics panel. Joining us this morning will be Jonathan Gibson and Charlie Downs. This is Talk TV. Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast with me, David Bull. The time 8:22 now on Sunday, May the 7th. Thank you very much indeed for all your messages, particularly Lee in Wellington. A great show, David, as usual. Obviously, we're missing Dr. Rennie, but please say a massive good morning and good health to my dad, Barry, in Wolverhampton. He's 80 this year, and we sadly lost my mum, his wife, this time last year. So, hello to Barry in Wolverhampton, and a very happy birthday to you. And he ends this message by saying, God save the king. Quite right. Very patriotic indeed. Lots of other messages as well. Also, people saying send my love to, or their love to Dr. Rennie as well. Well, she's on a sunbed somewhere, sunning herself. It's all right for some, isn't it? Right, it's time for our Future Politics panel.
The Future Politics panel.
Yes, indeed. Well, joining us this morning, Jonathan Gibson, political commentator, and Charlie Downs, who is also a political commentator. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning.
Right, I have to start. Coronation, did you watch it? Were you engrossed?
Watched the whole thing. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
I actually had a friend's birthday, so unfortunately I missed a bit of it, and there was religious stuff, so...
Right.
But I heard a lot about it.
Well, so that's a really interesting point. Just in terms of watching the Coronation, will you watch it?
I'll definitely see the thing tonight. I mean, my girlfriend's actually off there with her uncle, so I'm definitely going to be tuning into that.
So you're talking about the Coronation concert tonight?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so 20,000 people going to this, allegedly. I mean, I think it will be quite splendid.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very excited to see it. They've got lots of big performers there. Lionel Richie's there, Katy Perry's there. Who else is there?
Take that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I'll be very, I'm very excited.
Yeah, I'm more interested in Lionel Richie than Katy Perry. But let's start. I do want to touch on the Coronation because it's important, and I think this sums it up, the Sunday Times, which is the dawn of the Carolean age. What were your thoughts yesterday watching that? For me, it was a perfect blend of the majesty, the history of Britain, but it was deeply sacred and very spiritual, and actually very important in terms of the monarch who wants to be defender of all faiths, so obviously the representative from God, but at the same time, he's also then head of the armed forces, so the office has enormous weight behind it. I was deeply moved, actually.
That's right. I mean, I found the whole thing to be just a grand celebration of our culture. I don't think we'd seen Britishness allowed to display itself to such an extent since the Queen's funeral, actually. And before that, I don't know when the last time would have been, but I thought it was incredible. And I think the other thing to remember is, as much as we are, in not the best place as a country right now, when the British are allowed to display themselves, the whole world stops to watch, and it's majestic and it's magnificent and magical, and I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah. What about you, Jonathan?
For me, I think a lot of people see the Coronation and they see, the police everywhere, and they think, oh, okay, it's just another day. It's nothing, I don't need to go or whatever. I don't need to watch it. I've got other things to do. But I think it's a really important reminder just how lucky sort of we are to be living in this country, where we have freedom of religion. We're allowed to, speak what we want. And I think it's sort of a marker of that as well. It's a reminder to people of, how lucky we are to live in this country, to be able to practice, to be able to work here. And I think it's a really great opportunity to celebrate that sort of culture that we have and bring out, British values which we want to, highlight and showcase to the world and showcase to ourselves.
I mean, it's really interesting. When I lived abroad, I think that's absolutely right. It's not till you leave this country you realise what you've lost.
Absolutely.
Well, I remember when I was in school, I was taught that there was kind of no such thing as British values. This was during the Blair years, so this was sort of, mid-noughties. But I was...
You are young.
Yeah.
Frightening.
But it was, it was really... The sense I was given in school was that British value... It was almost like British culture was almost like the default culture, if you want. It was kind of... without any meaningful distinguishing characteristics. That culture was to be defined by the exotic, the foreign, the kind of strange. Whereas when you take a step back and observe British culture, it's as strange and exotic and particular and weird as they come.
Yeah.
We still. I mean, just this weekend has been a celebration of our tribal leader, basically this great father figure of the nation, and that's a very. I mean, I find that a deeply sort of. Yeah, tribal is the right word, I think.
Can I ask, what do you think of the change in the language? We talk about defender of all faiths.
Yes, I was certainly going to bring Jonathan in on that. How do you feel about that?
No, I think he absolutely... Look, the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth went over, paid his respects, stayed over there, and I think it's a fantastic mark, of the inclusion that Britain has when it comes to all faiths. I think it's, a really marvellous thing. I think we very much... what we've been able to do with this coronation is very much retain the Britishness, the sort of traditional monarchy, which I think is so fantastic in terms of paying respect to our country, whilst also highlighting more recently the developments that allow people in Britain to all practice their faith and all practice their unique cultures, which is something that is also respected and can be included in the conversation of what is Britishness.
And of course the oil came from Jerusalem itself, didn't it? In the ampulla used on the spoon and all the rest of it. I mean, incredibly symbolic actually, and I think I want to watch it all again actually, and because I missed bits because I was working, but I really really want to actually look at it again, because I think the devil is in the detail.
Oh, absolutely. There's some glorious moments, as we touched on earlier, and I think having a look at that to end. But it is interesting, the change in the language, not just defender of all faiths, but I come not to be served, but to serve. All that sort of thing.
Very, very interesting. Also, of course, we were instructed to pledge allegiance, and then it was reined back, wasn't it? And then we were sort of invited.
If you want to take... But it's also, I mean, it's a Christian service, if you like, is what happened, and you're talking about Protestants within the language of it. And in Christian services, people repeat things after the person who is conducting the service says, and then you do a little phrase. So that phrase can be, God save the King, or whatever it happens to be, or yes we do. So I think it's all that sort of thing. It's the narrative again, though. So many of these things fall down because of the narrative and how you sell it to the general population. And if you're saying, I'm serving you, you're not serving, and you're not serving me, work on that sort of basis. But I'm not quite sure, and different religions came out on different things. Defending all faiths is quite difficult, isn't it? Because there's a conflict between that.
Well, there's plenty of... I mean, that's the story of history, is it not?
Well,
but
indeed,
I think
the cause of more wars than anything else, religion.
Quite right. But I think what the king is basically saying, when he says he's defender of all faiths, that strikes me as him saying he's almost a neutral arbiter between the faiths. And I actually think that that's not... This idea of neutrality in that way is not something that's possible, as far as I'm concerned. I think you kind of need to have a basis.
Is he not defending the right to have faith?
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it.
Exactly, freedom of religion, the ability to, be Jewish or be Muslim, be Sikh, be Christian, whatever it is, and, still very much, I think, retained a lot of the Christian elements, which, are the foundations of our country in many ways. But, I think what I interpreted that was saying that, we can continue to allow people to practice the faith that they choose to...
So someone's asked, possibly this is a very thorny issue, if Charles is defender of the faith, then which God is saving the king? I was just thinking that's really interesting. I suppose it's your God, depending on your religion.
I think the Rabbi Sachs, the late Rabbi Sachs, said and wrote that each religion speaks to different people in different ways. Clearly, I think everyone would agree that like the Christian God speaks to Christians, the Jewish God speaks to Jews, and I think everyone in their own sense would want to use their own religion and background to defend the king, and that's why the chief rabbi and other religious leaders stood up there and gave a prayer for the king, and said we want gave a blessing in order to protect him and sustain him, etc. So I think that's what he was really going for with that sort of.
It'd be interesting to hear the background to how that came about and whether he consulted the different religious.
I think it came from him.
I think the principle is absolutely right. You want a unified thing. I believe in all sorts of different things, but I just wonder if he consulted the different religious leaders.
I'm sure he did.
And work on that sort of basis. I would be foolhardy not to.
I mean, he has a history, doesn't he, of talking extensively to all faiths, actually, and trying to be as inclusive. And actually, for me, one of the other things, if you look at the front pages this morning, and this actually, I think, is extraordinary. So the Sun here, the weight of office on his face. I mean, I think that's really remarkable. This is a man who takes this very seriously. Just let's talk about something else. I think all of us were very nervous about what might happen in terms of protests and people possibly disrupting the coronation. I said earlier that HMS Diamond, which is our most advanced warship, is sitting in Greenwich because they took it that seriously in terms of the threat posed. Now, we also know that the Met did crack down very hard yesterday on Republic. It cracked down on Extinction Rebellion and all the rest of them. MPs and human rights group, or some of them, are now criticising the Met Police and saying that they were incredibly heavy-handed. Do you see it like that, Charlie?
Well, so I said this on Andre Walker's show last night, right? So there's part of me, there's the liberal streak in me that thinks people should be, they should be allowed to protest. It's a democratic right, this, that, and the other. Then there's the absolutist in me. Then there's the the deep English spirit that says crush them. Crush these Republicans.
Isn't it more? You are quite draconian when you get going. I know. I mean, I totally agree about the freedom of speech thing, but Jonathan, just in terms of the Met's response, and they have said they acted in a proportionate manner. Look, there were serious concerns. They knew that people were trying to cause trouble, obviously, and Graham Smith, who is the head of Republic, obviously was arrested, kept for 16 hours in custody. One might argue that's a bit long, well, you can say that. But just in terms of that, they have said, the Met has been very clear, it is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We had to do that. And actually, surely they should ensure the safety of the onlookers, the vast majority of people who were there, to enjoy themselves and to witness history.
No, the role of the police is to enforce the safety of the onlookers. That is true. However, I think it is so important in this country that we have a freedom to protest and a freedom to, speak. And even if I could disagree with him, I'm not a Republican, I'm a monarchist, we should be able to, if as long as, you know, they're not using violent means, they're doing it peacefully, and in some cases, you know, they told the police beforehand. We saw, for example, at the Queen's funeral, when the lawyer was literally just holding up a blank card and he got arrested. There have been cases prior in which, you know, there has been unduly force which has been used by the police.
But let's put it the other way around. Imagine if something had happened and we'd allowed protesters, etc., and that something had happened as a result. The public would have been an absolute outcry.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. And I think what we need is clarity. What we need to work at is why did that happen at that moment? Because people need to understand what the rules are. There has to be a right to protest. Must you sort of throw them away, lock away, throw away the key?
I do agree.
I think that's what you need to look at is give them a right to protest, but also set the parameters. Because trust has been at an all-time low for the police. And I made the point beforehand, trust comes in on foot but leaves on horseback. And what we need to look at is that sort of mechanism. The way you do that is to get clarity. So there needs to be further explanation about why this happened in this instant, because we haven't yet had that. So people are speculating. I personally think if you're just suspecting there might be a problem, it may not be enough. What you're doing is anticipating this could be a big issue, and therefore they came in early. That's what we need better clarity on, and I suggest that the police come out very quickly and clarify that so people don't jump in with all their conspiracy.
I mean, it would be fascinating. I think the vast majority of people in this country will think, well, they did a good job, actually.
And they did do it. They did a phenomenal job because it went seamlessly. But I do think there's this little element that could upset it if it's not dealt with early.
We need to make sure it doesn't form a precedent for, you know, a scenario in which people can't feel like they can protest, because there were people that were arrested miles and miles away from the
So that's a great question. So therefore, the question is, if we're then shaping this framework, what should people be allowed to do?
Yes.
So I feel very passionately, you should not block the road, you should not block ambulances, you should not block people going to work.
Yeah, so you know, there needs to be we have a law in this country. If you're breaking the law, you get arrested. You know, it's pretty clear. It's quite clear. If you know you're not sure whether someone, you know, might have something, and you know there's almost no evidence for it, as I felt like there were cases with the arrest in the recent Coronation in which people were arrested, I think that is wrong. But you know, if you see, you know, someone carrying a knife or a gun or whatever it is, or you know, acting illegally, throwing eggs at the king or whatever it is, you know, that is not acceptable. And
it's exactly that. You need to have that clarity, saying these are the rules, this is what you've broken, this is the consequence. If you're not sure, if you haven't broken a law, that's where you lose trust in the police.
Isn't there a sort of disclaimer for yesterday? In that it was a once-in-a-lifetime event. The police were maybe overcautious, but I would prefer it that way around.
And I don't think the law comes with disclaimers on that sort of basis. You have to have... The law needs to be clear. You're absolutely right. We want to do everything to make sure it went smoothly, but the law needs to be clear, and the police need to make sure the message is clear as well. They did a brilliant job yesterday. There are still some questions that need to be answered. My recommendation is to answer those questions before people step in and say they've gone too far.
Something I would like to add to this, I think, is, you know, we're talking about free speech and protest and that sort of thing here. Now, I would actually argue, as somebody who is proudly British and English and who loves things like yesterday, our traditions and this sort of thing, I actually don't think it's up for debate. I actually don't think it's up for debate that we have things like we had yesterday. That's how we do things in this country. That's part of our culture, has been for thousands of years. And I'm sorry, that's just the way it's going to be.
Interesting.
I disagree, because I think a part of our culture is that we're a democracy right now, you know, and that's a changing framework. And whilst I'm a monarchist, I think, you know, Republicans should be allowed to, you know, express their views.
I totally agree with that.
I totally agree as well. It's nonsense to say it's not up for a debate.
I mean, Charlie's obviously going to be Justice Secretary at some point.
This country has got, you know, a history of, you know, speaking out on the streets and protesting.
Well, absolutely. Well, fighting for women's votes, for example, Emily Pankhurst and all that. So all of that is really important, and I absolutely agree. Let's move on and talk about something that's really been overshadowed, really, the local election results. Because, I mean, it is extraordinary. People have forgotten that we had local elections. Turnout was pretty abysmal across the board. But however you spin this, it's not great for Labour, is it? And it's an absolute nightmare for the Tories.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tories lose 1,000 seats, Labour gain 400. I mean, that doesn't scream landslide general election victory to me.
No, absolutely. And, of course, the Conservatives were already at well, not all-time low, but they were certainly low, weren't they, in 2019?
Well, it shows you that it's people. I don't think there really are that many people in this country who are virulently pro-Labour. Obviously, there are some, but I think that a vote for Labour in the local elections, or Lib Dem for that matter, it's a vote against the Tories as opposed to being in favour of those two parties.
So the least worst for some people, maybe.
Yeah, it is that. But then, you know, there's still plenty of time to the next general election, and I really do think the Tories can. I'm not saying I want this, because I don't support the party in the slightest, but I think they can turn it around. Based on this election.
So that's really interesting. Just in terms of the Conservative Party, I think they're going to. I mean, they're spinning it that it was a triumph. But I
somehow
good day for bad news.
Exactly. So they were jolly pleased there was a coronation. But just in terms of this, does this act as a wake-up call to the Conservatives, or is it actually that in local elections people don't vote as they would nationally? I said earlier, it's about potholes. It's about actually libraries being open. It's about the environment you're in, whether you've got trees, whether you've got buses.
Look, there is an element of that. I would say you cannot avoid, unfortunately, the national framework and what's happening in the way that is having some influence. I agree in some respects that the Labour gains are in part because of the Conservatives' own failures. I would say it's also potentially due to Labour sort of rebranding their party in a very different light, where it used to be. But I do think as well that council votes are different. There is a long time to go still before a general election, and a lot can happen. I think Rishi Sunak was probably aware, I'd hope so, that there was a lot of problems within the Conservative Party prior to these council elections, and that's why he basically tried to completely ignore it. And Oliver Dowden said, if we don't lose 1,000 seats, it will be, okay. Which is just, what sort of a standard is that assessing? It's ridiculous.
Well, absolutely right. And of course, you see, in terms of Rishi Sunak, it's very interesting. He has these 5 points behind him the whole time now.
Yes.
I mean, talk about being hoisted by your own petard. I mean, if he doesn't deliver those, the electorate will say, well, you didn't do that there. I'm not voting.
But they're easy to deliver, aren't they? I mean, this is the whole
votes. They haven't done a very good job.
Well, no, but it's interesting that you're doing certain sort of things, and like it's like inflation, getting inflation down or whatever. All the experts were predicting it's going to be much better than that sort of base. I mean, you were saying earlier, we touched on this with Charlie, is that you're turning around and saying that they can turn it around within the time. What do they need to do?
That's hard. I mean, I think stopping the boats is a big one because it's such a visible and visceral problem that it feels so wrong.
Yeah, you come here on a boat, you're stuck in a hotel, you have better circumstances than actually people who are struggling and can't actually afford to go shopping in Tesco or any other supermarket.
Well, homeless veterans, to use the absolute stereotype.
Yeah.
I think that's probably, for a lot of people, number one. Now, beyond that, there are certain things like certain economic things. Now, I'm not an economist, but to me, it certainly looks like this is a ship that's going to be very difficult to right. And I think that whoever was in power, it would kind of the economic decline we're seeing would be happening regardless. It's just, I suppose the Tories need to put a brave face on it.
So what is very interesting, and I looked at the map this morning at some very early hour this morning, but the Conservatives have lost that red wall. So the Northwest particularly, I was an MEP for the Northwest, so they need to regain those people who believed in Brexit, actually. And I think that's underpinning this is another, it's just disillusionment. And I use this expression about managed decline. It feels like, apart from yesterday, which was marvellous, but managed decline. And someone needs to show some vision, don't they?
Well, I think Keira's put a lot of emphasis on, returning Brexit-backing Britain, as he called it, to Labour.
I'm not sure I believe him.
Well, he's done a pretty good job of it, to be fair, in the local council elections. You've got Plymouth, Stoke, Swansea, I think, as well. You can't say he's not doing an effective job. He doesn't want to.
Well, he's detoxified the party, hasn't he, as well?
He's done that. I think he's made it potentially much less hard left, particularly both economically, socially, on Brexit. He's saying we will support Brexit. He's saying, I think his approach to immigration is slightly different in a sense, and more what I'm aligned to potentially, which is that I think that one of the biggest problems is the backlog. It's not so much, the people that we're letting in, it's more that you've got a massive backlog.
I think 140,000 or
it's huge.
It's absolutely enormous.
They're not allowed to work, right, which I think is ridiculous. They're literally being housed, obviously, in tax-paying hotels. I don't think they're particularly luxurious or nice, as might be framed, but, still, it costs money, obviously. And so I think the fault lies with the Home Office,
So what's the solution? Because that's what people say, but it's easy to identify the problem. What you need to look at is the solution. What is the solution?
Okay, so in my opinion, if I was Home Secretary, firstly, you need much better processing patterns, and I think that comes with, firstly, actually making immigration and gaining immigration status easier and more accessible to people, because at the moment there are people who have been waiting for 4 years to gain immigration status. It's beyond a joke, and that's costing every year the taxpayer money. So that's the first thing, sorting the backlog, having a more transparent system, having maybe, a minimum or maximum number of people that you can have, ensuring that we're, getting the people that we particularly need to fill particular jobs, because we do have in a lot of sectors not enough people for the jobs, and all the companies have made this incredibly clear. It's really affecting our economy, and we need to find a solution. And, obviously it'd be fantastic to get more Britons working, but, we still can use immigrants and have been using immigrants for many years to great effect to support our economy, whether, through healthcare, whether through in corporations, and I think, that needs to continue.
Just very quickly, if I may, so Keir Starmer has also put housing into this. I don't know if you saw this morning. I mean, he says he'll reintroduce housing targets. There's no doubt in my mind that housing is a huge electoral issue. Young people, like yourselves, to get on the housing ladder, I don't know how you're going to do it, to be honest.
Yeah, it's quite a scary prospect, to be honest. I mean, I really do think that Conservatives, like myself, need to understand that
small C Conservatives.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. When it comes to economics, the priority must always be the manoeuvring of private property into the hands of young people who want to start families.
100%.
Because you can't. I really don't think it's that possible to start a family without owning property. And so instead of this just endless drive towards growth,
but that's interesting
GDP,
because the Europeans don't buy properties. They tend to rent them.
Yeah.
So you can start a family, but isn't the aspiration that everyone should be able to buy?
That's exactly right, and I think that would be a great positive vision for young people. If they did have the prospect of buying a house. Now, on the idea of housing targets and this sort of thing, I would add that yes, it's an important issue, but we are not at replacement birth rate in this country. For example, the indigenous population is not, and yet our population continues to grow, and this is because of mass legal immigration. So at the end of the day, I don't know what it's like where you all live, but around where I'm from in Kent, the fields and the rolling plains and forests of the Shires are being paved over by identical housing developments.
So that's
a house forest,
and that I'm seeing in Suffolk as well. Which actually a lot of people are very, very upset about. It will be a massive electoral issue, I think. Also, there are 1,000. I think there's room for 1.2 million homes on brownfield sites.
1.4, I thought it was.
Fine, a lot of houses. 1.4 million.
Tons.
Why aren't we building them?
I think it was ridiculous, and I was very angry actually at the article that I saw this morning by Theresa Villiers was saying, we should actually protect the green belt, protect these rural areas.
I saw that.
It made me very, very angry because, firstly, a lot of the green belt is actually simply not green or environmental. It's literally to protect urban sprawl, and so it just means people develop in other areas. It massively increases inequality in that a lot of it is privately owned rather than being able to build on it. It's young people like ourselves are not able to get property. We're not able to even renting is incredibly expensive in London.
Sure.
And
and that's the problem, isn't it? Because then the solution is not just building the houses, you've got to be able to afford to do it.
That's
and
right,
you've got issues such as things like inheritance tax, which actually most people are property rich and cash poor.
Absolutely. But also the thing is also elderly people. I said this the other week, and I had some kickback. But I know that some elderly people who want to move can't actually afford to move, and they're in houses that are far too big that we need to liberate for young families. Actually, that's really important.
I'd just like to add very quickly. The point that I'm driving at here is the conversation is always around the supply side. So it's about supplying enough houses. Whereas I would prefer to have a conversation about demand side, because demand is upstream from supply, and demand is coming from mass legal immigration.
No, there's massive demand. We have massive demand, but the solution to that is increasing supply, in my opinion. It's not decreasing.
But why not decrease demand?
Because we already have tons of demand, both from young people itself.
But why not decrease it if we can?
But it's not. It's also not just supply and demand. It's the ability to afford it.
Yeah,
and I think if you can't, it's no good if there's lots of houses and they're £1 million if you're in the centre of London. You just can't do it. And I think that's the reality.
And we can
need to look at that
houses.
Solution.
Exactly.
Yeah, build more, but you don't want to also devalue the property market.
And I think there's one other point, which is we need the infrastructure. You need schools, you need hospitals, you need transport, and we simply aren't doing that. The way we build in this country, I think, is frankly ridiculous. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen. Jonathan Gibbs and Charlie Downs, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Time for a break now. After the break, it's your turn, your calls, your thoughts and your messages. This is Talk TV. Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast with me, David Bull. The time 8:49 on Sunday, May the 7th. Lots and lots of messages coming in about Charlie and Jonathan, who are our Future Politics panel. This one says, I'm absolutely loving Charlie and Jonathan this morning. Thank you very much indeed. I think it's really important, isn't it, Andrew? I'm joined by Andrew Eborn, barrister extraordinaire. It's so important to hear from... I mean, they've made me feel terribly old. But,
just before your birthday as well.
Just before I become even older. But to hear from young people eloquently about
Absolutely.
the shaping of this country.
And that's why I asked, look, what's going to make a difference? Because you can turn around and we can live in our own little vacuum and just concerned about ourselves. We need to talk to everybody from every aspect of society, hear those voices and do something about it. Because it's only by doing that. But it's also not just highlighting the problems, it's also talking about what those solutions might be. Because actually those in power, or those who want to be in power, should be listening to those voices.
Very interesting. Cliff in Berkshire has a yeehaw, he says, Dr. David. So obviously talking about Caroline Faraday. Caroline was talking about guns and mass killings. I wonder if it's more about the American people rather than the guns themselves. Switzerland has many guns. It's a requirement to be prepared to defend their country. And yet I cannot remember a single Swiss mass shooting. Do you think it's possible to disarm American people given their love of guns? No. And the sheer number of them. Is it a mentality?
I think it is interesting. When I was looking at where to bring up our wonderful children, we looked at both London and also New York. Absolutely. And at that time, the mayor was saying, we're going to bring our murder rate down to below 1,000 in New York. And in the whole of the UK...
Is this Giuliani?
Yes, it was. And if there was... If the whole of the UK, if there were one murder, it would hit the headlines possibly for a whole week. And that, for me, was the biggest difference. And I think it's not... that most Americans are not crazy people. You get somebody who's armed, who is a complete lunatic, and goes in and then hits the headlines around the world. That's the issue. So there needs to be control. I understand both sides of the debate, but there needs to be controls in place.
I couldn't agree more. Lots of other messages. Dr. David, I love Talk TV, says Linda in Cheshire. Good morning to you. But the best bit so far was last night, after party with Mike and Kev. What did they do? I was in bed, actually.
I saw it.
Apparently they had 3 bottles of champagne, a bottle of Pinot Grigio and a bottle of gin.
Each.
Lucky them.
It showed.
Well, I have to say there was quite a lot drunk in Talk TV Towers yesterday, but I had to run across the road, actually. I bought some fizz for Sharon Osbourne. And for various others, David Emmanuel and so on, and then cheekily gave her a kiss, actually.
I saw that photo.
Did you see that photo?
Explored yourself.
Well, no, she, and obviously I know Sharon very well, but I felt she needed... this was in the middle of her show, and I felt, there we are, there's a picture of it. So me...
There you go.
Yes, taking advantage of Sharon Osbourne. It's not every day you can say that. So I gave her some fizz, and I thought that helped her.
And was it British fizz? I mean, I had English fizz.
So do you know, I tried to get English fizz, but I had to go around here and I couldn't get it. So
it was sensational. As I say, Guy Ritchie, I was there at lunchtime, and English fizz is what was served, and it's glorious.
It is glorious, and in fact we've had a chap on tasting, and there are different types actually, and I think we need to have far more in terms of English wine. Interestingly, it's not cheap.
And it is interesting because the method, and you can't call it champagne because champagne's the region and so forth, but the method for producing this sparkling wine and the stuff that we do here, we should be shining a spotlight on Britain as we have done. We've got the Coronation now, got the spotlight of the world upon us. We should be showing the best of British across all sorts of things, from the products, from the services, from the people, from our rich heritage. All of that sort of thing makes sense. But sparkling wine is superb in this country.
I couldn't agree more. Gemma is on the line from Staffordshire. Good morning, Gemma.
Morning, Gemma.
Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you very much indeed. How are you? What are you doing for the Coronation weekend?
I didn't do much. I listened to it on the radio on the way to work.
Right.
And then when I got to work, I taught the piano, and I taught The Fields of Athen Rye at the request of my pupil, my 16-year-old piano pupil. I know, what a song.
Yeah.
And then I did a little bit more listening on the radio, but I got lost. So I did a lot of listening, and then when I finished work, there's that picture. When I finished work, I watched it all, as much of it as I could bear. Have you been feeding Sharon Osbourne alcohol?
Maybe. I'm pleading the fifth there. Yes, I'm afraid I was giving Sharon some fizz yesterday. But, I mean, so I'd done Coronation breakfast, and I was delighted with that, with Rosanna Lockwood, and we were delighted it went really well, and then felt it was only right and proper to toast the King.
Yeah, why not?
Why not, indeed. So tell me, you in terms of British values, we were talking about those just a minute ago. What's your opinion?
Well, I was a little bit saddened by that very eloquent young man that you had on the right. Can't remember his name, but on the right.
On the right, Charlie.
Politically, or
no? Yeah, well, both actually.
I don't know what he's politically.
Yes, Charlie.
Yeah, I was very saddened that he said that when he was at school, he was taught that there were no British values.
Yes.
That made me sad, and I don't disbelieve him, but I'm surprised that he's managed to become such an eloquent raconteur and political contributor on your show and many others, I presume, without a decent education. And he seems to have a good idea of what British values are. So I'm saddened by that. And in the mid-2000s, I was teaching, and there was a directive from the government, I think, and Google to redesign the Google logo. And they had to think of pictures to make the letters into that represented British values. Now, I was in the Midlands, and all of the paperwork that came with it was things like suggestions. So you could use Big Ben for the L.
Right.
Yeah, and you could maybe use the E as the London I. And every single reference was to London.
How interesting.
And my children in the Midlands, in Walsall, they've never been to Birmingham, never mind London.
Yeah.
And I was trying to think of tall buildings in the Midlands. I was trying to think of Spaghetti Junction, right? So I suggested Spaghetti Junction for the E.
Right, okay.
They didn't know what it was.
Really?
Yes, really. So
I know what it is.
Yes. It's not that they don't know what British values are. It's that they don't know their own country, because a lot of children and people don't explore where they live. They get on a plane and go to Lanzarote or wherever, and they come back.
What a brilliant point.
Right in front of them.
So you make a brilliant point, and it touches on something I think we mentioned earlier. Andrew was talking about train travel being so ridiculously expensive. So you could go to, say, Cornwall or Devon or some of the beautiful parts of the north of this country, but actually it's cheaper sometimes to get on a cheap flight.
Not only sometimes, it's actually much cheaper to fly to the south of France than it is to go up to the Lake District or to Birmingham.
Is that the problem,
like
Gemma, do you think, partly?
But yeah, that's one of the problems, definitely. And then the other thing with the monarchy.
Yes.
So Elizabeth was a very stable character in her life. Charles has not been that, and I'm not having a go at him, but he hasn't had an easy ride. Okay, he's had a lot of trauma and heartbreak and nightmare, and it's been difficult for him, really difficult, especially in his childhood. And now he's the defender of all faiths. Did I hear that right?
Yes, that's what he's asked to be.
I think that's a desperate move to say that, because he can't possibly fulfil that. So what his job has got to do is hard enough without becoming the defender of all faiths. Open to everybody. What?
Well, so it's really interesting, actually. I think that's come from him, and actually there's a lot of people who've messaged in saying they're against that, because obviously he's head of the Church of England, and so it doesn't square for them that he's defender of all faiths.
Exactly, David. And people wonder why children and teenagers and young people haven't got a good sense of what Britain is, when the monarch is trying to be everyone's friend and everyone to everyone. Everything to everyone. That's the problem.
It is interesting, isn't it?
As soon as we go into who we are as British people, we are colonialists.
And somebody actually changed the narrative, didn't they? They sort of turned around and say, rather than defender of all faiths, it's the defender of the right to have faith, which is not, it's a communication issue. Do you think that would be okay, that he can turn around and say that you can have whatever faith you want, or is that in and of itself a problem?
No, I think that's a good basis to begin with, but he has to define what Christianity means to him. And if he's going to be a Christian king, not I say if, he is a head of the Church of England, then he needs to do that properly and actually think about England or Great Britain, and actually think about Christianity and how that can help the people of his country,
So that's a really interesting point, and actually I think many people in the country feel that actually what it means to be British is being watered down. And you're right, I think, about the Church of England. I mean, certainly the papers this morning, you can see the weight of office is weighing very heavy on him. Maybe, I mean, he's a deeply spiritual man, I know that, and obviously takes this very seriously, but you make some great points. Thank you very much indeed. Gemma. I mean, I was really struck yesterday by his face, by the weight of office, and I think, you know, he's wanted it so long, and it's just really interesting, isn't it?
It was interesting, and I was watching him throughout the whole thing. I mean, he seemed, as I say, he seemed very vulnerable and actually very nervous. And if you look at his face, when you look back at the footage, having the chance of doing that, is he closed his eyes many times, and you can see that the powerful image that is, and the nervous. There was a lot of nervousness there as well.
Very powerful indeed. Thank you very much indeed for the moment, Andrew. Time for a quick break. Lots more still to come. This is Talk TV.
This is Talk TV.
A very good morning to you. It's just after 9 o'clock on Sunday, May the 7th. I'm David Bull. Thank you very much indeed for your company this morning. Now, really good news, actually. Good news. There, apparently, although it looks absolutely gloomy here in London, apparently it is actually going to be very warm. It's going to be 21 degrees in parts of Britain today. Oh, yeah, sizzle, sizzle. There are just 45 days to go until summer, and I can wear my Speedos.
Your summer station. Talk Radio.
Talk Radio.
Oh, no, not that again. And 232 days to go. Can't quite believe this until Christmas.
Are you on the good list or the naughty list?
Very much the naughty list. And there are just 2 days to go until my birthday, and I shall be 98.
Hurrah!
Hurrah! Happy birthday to you! Thank you very much indeed. Right, today's fascinating facts. Now, Andrew.
Yes.
I don't know if you're aware of this. Today's fascinating facts now we can see in front of us. Do you remember what they were?
I do. They were so good, but you present them so beautifully. I don't want to detract.
No. So this is the bit. I didn't warn you. Actually, you have to remember them. I forgot because
all of them. Well, I remember the bit because there's the Portsmouth, and if you go down to the Victory, and there's a bit of the Victory which is on the Coronation,
the Diamond Jubilee.
It was a Diamond Jubilee, and it has a little crowny thing.
Yes,
on
made
top.
from the wood from the Victory.
Made from the wood.
And that was actually in 1765. Of course, that was the Victory. Was the flagship of Nelson.
Yes.
Was launched in Chatham, in Kent. That was 1765. What were the other two? Do you remember?
I do. There was the other one about the glorious thing that they had about the railways as well. You're talking about that, which was bad news about the railways.
Very bad.
Because they cancelled about over 200. They were planning to get rid of about 2,000 with the ridiculous report. And they were going to use about 5,000 miles of railway as a result of it. And the days then, they thought it was stinky and dirty. The trains are going to be replaced by cars. And as a result of that, they thought it was going to be much better than going to cars. The reality is it's taken out the arteries around the world, which connects the whole of the UK. It is scandalous, and now more people are having to use trains than cars. The youth can't afford to run cars anyway, but train prices are ridiculously crazy, which we need to look at.
Absolutely. In Suffolk, where I live, I mean, certainly the town where I grew up, we no longer have a railway. We still have the railway pub. We still have the station pub, but there is no actual station or railway. I mean,
it's extraordinary.
It is.
And the interesting thing is that they've now said they've got 1,500 miles of extra cycle lanes, most of which seem to be around Regent's Park, where I live, and you can't drive anywhere. But you work on that sort of principle. So there's some good, but it's a lesson for the future.
Well, it is, and also locally, we had a derelict station 5 miles away from where I live, and actually the community, I believe, got together and has done that station up, and it's wonderful, and there's a coffee shop and stuff like that. So I mean, I don't think it's possible to reverse the beaching changes, is it? I mean, it would cost too much for starters.
It would cost a lot of money, but we need to plan these things, and I think this is why it's so important to look at real issues. And when, as a futurist, you need to predict what's going to happen in the future. Look at real issues, and what I loved about today's show, we've touched on lots of really weighty issues in a wonderful, light-hearted way, but also some serious stuff as well. And I think within those problems there are some solutions, but you need to hear voices from everywhere.
So it's really interesting that, and it leads beautifully. It's almost like you've done this on purpose. It's beautiful. Because I do want to talk about this other story, which is interesting. It's in the papers today. I had planned to talk about this anyway.
Yes.
But essentially, this is an article in the Telegraph this morning talking about that artificial intelligence, AI, poses a greater threat than climate change. This is according to a former Google scientist. Now, apparently, he goes on to say, this is Geoffrey Hinton.
Yes.
He is often called the godfather, I think, of AI. What is so interesting about this is it's almost the stuff of science fiction, isn't it? So he basically resigned from Google because so he wanted to speak freely about AI. Obviously, has progressed at an enormous rate, but he's deeply concerned about where this leads.
Absolutely, and he's not the only one. Elon Musk and various others have warned about this. Stephen Hawking said that it is our greatest human achievement, but also potentially the biggest existential threat. And if you're looking at this sort of side, so basically what's happened, the tech bosses were summoned to the White House last week on Star Wars Day, May the 4th, and they were told they must protect the public from what's going to happen with AI. And people like Elon Musk have called for a sort of pause, if you like, while we try and work out exactly how powerful it is. They said you've got to wait 6 months to turn around and say we need protection and so on and so forth. Every single day you open the papers, there are stories about AI and what's going to happen. And if you look at the statistics, they're turning around and saying about 300 million jobs will be lost as a result of the advances in AI and robotics and so on and so forth. At the same time, however, PwC has estimated that by 2030, about $15 trillion will be contributed to the global economy as a result of AI. So what we need to do is to actually understand the opportunities, but also be aware of the threats.
100%. But I mean, extraordinary. What I didn't realise was that they're basically, these machines are trained with millions of text. I mean, millions. Yes. You couldn't possibly read all this from the internet. They read hundreds of thousands of books, and therefore all their computing power is based on all of this. They absorb millions of pictures and videos to generate, and this is the point, lifelike but fake images, films and music.
Absolutely, and this has been the very essence of what's happened. So we had the Weekend working on that sort of basis with that sort of fake story that went out. So Universal Music are turning around and saying that now that AI can basically create music, what they're doing is they're using existing copyright works to do that. So we need to look at rules and regulations as to how you can do that. You had an AI-generated photograph won a photography competition, and it looked like, absolutely, and the person only confessed when he went up to accept the award and said, actually, I couldn't possibly accept this, it was generated by AI. You also had the wonderful thing a few weeks ago, you had a fake picture put out with the Pope in a wonderful white puffer jacket. If you haven't seen it,
I did see it. Yeah.
They say the devil wears Prada, well, the Pope prefers puffer, is what I said.
It was fake.
But it was fake. And they also had Donald Trump being arrested and so on and so forth. So now, I always urge people, question everything. We're living in a world where basically you're being surrounded with information, most of which is false.
So it's really interesting that, and it is increasingly difficult to work out what's true and what is not true. And actually, I've noticed on some of the social media that people retweet stuff without actually reading it, for example, and it's now prompting you saying, don't you want to read this article before you actually tweet it, for example?
And absolutely, that's what you need to do. And that's the reality. There's so much fake news out there. A German magazine, for example, did an interview with Michael Schumacher, who obviously has not spoken in public forever, and it was splattered over the front cover. There was a picture of Michael, and in the small print, they said it was generated by AI. This is the responses Michael might have given, and obviously his family are looking about legal action and so on and so forth.
I mean, I'm of an age where I love Doctor Who, I mean, back to its original, but I remember this storyline years ago. The fact is that you build the robots become so powerful, they outnumber...
They take over.
And they take over the world.
Rise of the Machine, absolutely, and that's been the stuff of many movies, Space Odyssey and so on and so forth. You look at HAL and those sort of things. We have to be aware, but not only of the threats, but the opportunities. The opportunities are tremendous, but what...
Are they?
They are tremendous. They will make our lives so much easier, all the jobs that can be automated.
But they'll make people unemployed.
But any technology does. Any advance, from the days of burning the printing presses to looking at that sort of stuff. What it will do, it'll get rid of lots of mundane jobs. We were talking earlier in your glorious segment across the oceans, looking at the strike. Absolutely. So writers now can basically be replaced by chatbots and so on and so forth. Because writing, you can say, writing the style of a Pulitzer winner, and it's glorious. It will pump out some great stuff.
And I'm deeply nervous about university students using artificial intelligence to generate dissertations, for example. You know, how on earth do the lecturers actually work out whether they actually wrote it?
Well, they're doing it exactly now. So what they're saying is, let's have an oral test as well.
Good.
So what's happening is rather like a lawyer, if you like, used to go to the dusty old books in these wonderful libraries and look at the books. You can now tap it in and you get all the cases, all the suggestions, all the arguments. And the Master of the Rolls was suggesting very recently that for certain cases, these chat bots, the AI, will be better than lawyers. It will increase efficiency and so forth. There are certain elements where you need...
Why? Because it looks at the legal precedent,
it can do that. And the same with doctors. We talked about chatbots the other week being more empathetic than some doctors because they have more time. Well, they have more time to do it. So
they have more time.
So it's a written response.
But maybe they could take off the burden from physicians,
and that's
from
what
nurses,
you have to do.
for example, that therefore you take away the more mundane stuff. and leave the clinicians to actually deal with the
So my recommendation, I talk around the world on this, as you know, and we, I think
I know, very good, very impressive.
It's gotta be good. No, but the reality is this.
That's why you live in Regent's Park.
It's a joy. A third bench on the left is always a fun. But the point that I make is understand the technology. It's incredibly powerful. It's not going to completely replace humans. It is a very powerful tool. What we need to do is understand that technology, harness those abilities to make things more efficient, to make sure you get the best information available to disseminate that, but also then to turn around and say there's a human element that we do need within that, and that's what you need to do. So the economics of it, for example, in the creative world, you can create every possible thing. One artist came out and said, actually, I'll split the money with the AI bot of 50%.
What does the bot need money for?
Well, they were the creators of it will turn around. So look at the economics of it. What we need to do is work out regulations need to be tightened up, but also look at the copyright, the intellectual property rights, privacy rights that are being infringed, and make sure there are adequate protection. But it starts with knowledge. Let's make sure that people flatten the learning curve, look at those sort of abilities. So if you're a lonely person of a certain age and you can't get through to your doctor, to be comforted by a bot, and you may not know it's a bot, but to turn around because it can imitate voices. I talked about this beforehand. Bruce Willis, he was in a Megaphone, which is a Russian telecom company. He was an advertisement, but it wasn't him. It was a fake version of him. He licensed the right to use his face, and he licensed his voice and so on and so forth, because you can do that and turn that into a commercial.
Didn't have to do any work and you got paid.
And exactly. And that's what I work in, the world of holograms, where you can recreate. You went and enjoyed ABBA, the avatars.
I did indeed. I went with the team here, including Tom, the producer.
He's still
we had a marvellous time, let me tell you.
Still glowing.
It was brilliant. But I mean, there's a great question from someone, Barry, has messaged in. Just in terms of, you know, like the US and say the UK and the Western world says, OK, we have to impose strict limits on what AI is allowed to do. And he says, and quite rightly, do you seriously think China and Russia will delay AI? Answer no.
And that's the point. And actually, Bill Gates, he was saying, great point, Barry, he was basically saying the same thing. So what happened is people are saying put a 6-month hold, but it's not going to... What it means, we are leading the charge in the AI revolution over here. We do not want to put a hold on. What we need to do is to make sure we understand, but make sure those safeguards
and
are
have regulations.
We do.
Yeah, so Terry in Birmingham says, David, we'll have to wait until AI is out of control, then moan. Stop moaning now. But that's the point, isn't it? We're just being forewarned. To be forewarned is to be forearmed.
It certainly is. And also get knowledge, because this is why I love to talk about this on a virtual daily basis. Back to the Futurist is what we call it.
Yes.
But on a daily basis, if you understand the capabilities, then you can harness that for good. And there are regulations that need to be put in place, and you need to get all sides of the industry talking. So get regulations, get things about privacy, make sure that copyright creators are protected, because the way that these machines work is by scraping the internet for all sorts of information. It's using existing copyright works, and if you're to create new ones, which are then indistinguishable from the real thing. And you can do fake voices. I mean, the retired actor James Earl Jones, who played Darth Vader, they basically replicated his voice using AI, but that's okay, because it was under license and so on and so forth. I advised Equity, the Actors Union, years ago to look at this, to be aware of the issue. If forewarned is forearmed, be aware of what's possible, because then you can be part of the discussion to make sure it's framed in an appropriate way.
So the question then remains, how do you teach these robots to have ethics?
Well, that's the interesting thing, because they're only as good as the machines that are put in there, and the concerns have always been that actually going to be used by bad actors, what people would call for bad, for spreading disinformation, for misinformation, for propaganda. So we need to make sure that the control comes into that sort of places. So in the legal world, for example, they have these things called hallucinations, and what it is, the AI, if it's not sure of a question, it will make it up. And there have been a couple of examples where they accused a law professor, for example, of gross misconduct or sexual inappropriateness, and completely false. I won't give the names, because I won't. It's publicly out there. But the whole point is now some of these people with these creating these AIs are building it in so that the chatbot, where it doesn't know the answer based on actual information, will say, I don't know. And that's something it hasn't done, rather like the phone's not saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The chatbot will always give an answer. And if you do, I would recommend, firstly, everybody goes and try it. You can try the versions free.
Yeah, I haven't done it.
You must do. Type in, who is David Ball?
Yeah, no, I don't want the answer. I really don't want the answer.
But it will work on that sort of premise. And I think that's what I would urge people to do. Understand the technology, harness those opportunities, but be aware of the risks as well.
It's fascinating. It really is the dawn of a new age, actually. And as I say, you know, it's something that I grew up thinking about and, you know, is the stuff of science. I mean, it is really extraordinary. Andrew, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Let's take a break. After the break, I'm delighted to say we have more royal news. Of course, Rupert Bell, our royal correspondent, will be joining us. This is Talk TV. Welcome back to Weekend Breakfast with me, David Bull. Time 9:21 on Sunday, May the 7th. I'm joined by Andrew Eborn, barrister extraordinaire, and seems to know an awful lot about AI as well. Lots of messages coming in about that, about saying actually the message was this one from Terry, just in terms of AI control, just as we did with the web and social media, we didn't do it. It's a law unto itself. It's actually bigger than governments. I think this is the point, actually. You need to make sure there are clear guidelines, regulations, and make sure that it's rolled out in an effective, and I will use that word again, ethical way.
Oh, no, it's got to absolutely be ethical. We need to, as I say, understand the technology and make sure that regulations and the law keeps up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Cliff in Berkshire says, oh, Dr. David, a Taurus named bull. How appropriate. Happy birthday for Tuesday. Thank you very much indeed. Is it Tuesday? My birthday?
Well,
yes, it is. It's Tuesday.
2 days away, you said.
I'm very confused. It's my age. Also, lots of other messages about the police. We were talking about the police and whether they were too heavy-handed, but Dr. David, this one says, thank goodness the police at last did their job. They did not go too far. The police need to keep this up. And obviously, we need to sort out some of the other protesters and what they're doing in terms of causing problems. Lots of other messages coming in about, I didn't think this was going to be controversial, but clearly it is. Wendy in Dover says, King Charles cannot be defender of all faiths. Defender of the faith is a title bestowed upon the monarch. It's a fixed thing. Charles cannot suddenly decide to extend the remit. It's like the Duke of Westminster deciding that Westminster is not enough and calling himself the Duke of Greater London without any authority so to do.
And it makes a very good point. It's what we were touching on earlier. And if you listen to the language in the Coronation, he talks about being a Protestant within that. And I think, as we wisely said on this show, I think we've clarified for Charles what he means is he's defending the right for you to have your own faith.
I think that was my line.
I think it was. Yeah. So I think David Bull has actually
I have advised the King.
I think you have you're an advisor to the King, which is why you're wearing that glorious Jerry. I'll tell you what, I have to say, your audience here have been brilliant with their suggestions. I loved your David Spice thing. I thought that was really good. A reference, of course, to the Spice Girl. Davy Spice.
Oh, look at that! Who did that? That's very, very good. I'm very impressed by that.
Look at that.
Very similar bodies as well. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very. I didn't know that was coming. Actually,
I did. That's why I get the segue.
Oh, did you?
Thank you. It's got to be
well, my producer's fired again. No, Tom is fired yet again. He needs to go to bed earlier. Actually, he's very grumpy again this morning. Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah. Does he get grumpy?
Yeah. No, he's not really. Yeah. Right, I think it's time for something else. It's time for Rupert's Royal Roundup.
Rupert's Royal...
Oh, there we are. Well, I think we're having all sorts of exciting technical issues.
That's good, isn't it?
But look at my backdrop now.
I love your backdrop.
Replete, I think, with Union flags. Rupert Bell, are you there?
Well, I think I am. I'm in a field in Gloucestershire, Badminton, not a million miles from where the King spent last night, because he left London, I think, about 4 o'clock, came down the M4. He preceded... Excuse me.
It's all that talking.
Well, I did a lot yesterday. He preceded me. He's at Highgrove tonight. Last night, his home just near Tetbury, where Badminton Horse Trials is obviously also near Tetbury. And I've come into a muddy field, and so that's why I'm not wearing my top hat and tails for you this morning.
Well, how glamorous. And Rupert, you were very, very busy yesterday with the Coronation coverage. Congratulations on all of that. I mean, you know, Talk TV celebrated in style, didn't we, in terms of the Coronation. Just your reflections on it. I mean, I was so struck by, I suppose, the dignity, the solemnity, the fact it's so sacred, the weight clearly on the King's face as he is monarch. I thought the whole thing was pretty spectacular.
It was, and for me, I think the moment when he had the crown placed on his head, bearing in mind he only wears that particular crown only the once for that short period.
That's right, it's an Edward's crown, isn't it?
It's an Edward's crown for that short period of time. You could see then that suddenly that moment, that the history, you know, the weight of history bearing down on his shoulders. So that was I think to me, the most significant moment for everybody, and for him in particular, because, of course, that is what he's been waiting for 70 years for, that special moment. And you could see then the sort of emotion of it, and also that very, in the end, intimate moment where his son pledged his troth to him to be his liege man and serve him. That suddenly, you looked at the whole picture while we were all watching it. That, in essence, while everybody was watching, they still managed to give the sense of a very private moment between father and son. And those were the two defining moments. It almost as well with the Queen, when she had the crown placed on her head, you could see then that all the tension then finally, and then she began to enjoy the rest of the service. And although it was pretty difficult moving around with that crown, because you basically have got to keep your head rock solid, because if you move and look down, it can easily fall off. So you're under lots of physical constraints. But she did, from there on in, look as if she was starting to enjoy the experience of being a focus of attention in such well, everybody looking at you so closely.
Really amazing. I as you know, presented Coronation Breakfast yesterday, and before I did that, I did a lot of research, so I read so much. And in some ways, actually, I'm delighted I did that, because actually then the coronation made sense. The fact is, that's why I know it's St Edward's crown. You know, the chair that was used, St Edward's chair, that's 700 years old. It dates back to 1300. Once you understand the symbolism of everything that was done, and that's when you realise the rich tapestry of history in this country. I thought also something else that struck me, when the king was sitting on St Edward's chair facing the high altar, it was him and his allegiance to God, and I found that incredibly moving.
Yeah, I think the whole thing, you know, you've even mentioned the sort of the words changing in elements of the service, but at heart, it is still very much the same. It has evolved through the time, from the moment, you know, Edward the Confessor built Westminster Abbey, and then William the Conqueror decided to sort of show his Britishness to be crowned in Westminster Abbey back in 1066. It has just evolved through time. Now, he was the 40th monarch to be crowned, and yes, there are changes. It was a shorter service. We didn't see all the dukes pledging their allegiance. It was still 2 hours of ritual that has evolved magnificently. And I think, you know, let's be honest, the monarchy can call its own rules. And when you know, in essence, Henry VIII decided to set up his own church. So the king making the odd little change, in relative terms, it's not nearly as dramatic as what Henry VIII did back all those years ago.
So just in terms of the guest list, and this really struck me, that the king also very much put his own stamp on this, because he invited all the European royals as well, not all of them, but a lot of them. I mean, and that's a break with tradition. Also, just from a political aspect, I thought it was very, very interesting to see representatives from the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, for example, Charles Michel, all there as well. So I wonder what you made of that. Was that a political point?
No, I don't think. Look, the point of the royal family is soft power. And we still need to work with Europe, whether we're in or out. You know, so the point is, Europe, you know, is our most significant trading partner, if you take it as a big unit. So in a way, his role is that soft power, and meeting all the Commonwealth leaders was equally as important in this post-Brexit environment. That is, in essence, one of the significant parts of the royal family. Yes, they can't make political statements and be seen to have an opinion, but they can help and are there to help the government of the time promote Britain. And yesterday was a manifestation of that, with all those world leaders who came in, all the European leaders who were here, royal family, and sort of uniting the royal families. We're in this together, mate, is a rather simplistic way of putting it. But in essence, that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I've had messages from Belgium, from Spain this morning, from people, and there they are, celebrating the coronation, watching this. Andrew made the point, 300 million or thereabouts, or even more probably, that watch the coronation globally. I mean, it's extraordinary. Just in terms of the royal families, though, I find that fascinating that he invited them, that, you know, it's essentially... I don't know, in terms of the United Kingdom, even though they are royal families, no one has a royal family quite like ours.
Yeah, no, well, whether he would have invited them, but I would have probably been working with the Foreign Office. The main thing is everyone we have diplomatic relations with was invited. And so that means why there was no Russians or North Koreans, and I don't know, there may be a couple of other countries that we don't have. That's why we saw a Chinese representative there. So there is very much, so there's very much a sort of political foreign policy element to it, and that's one of the criticisms often, is that we have neglected our foreign policy, but the monarchy is a way of being able to link in a sort of, okay, albeit you might say a showy way, but a lot of people like the trappings of being associated with that, and it does us, from a foreign point of view, a world of good at times. And yesterday was what those meetings on Friday were about, were probably as important as what we saw happening in Westminster Abbey yesterday.
Absolutely right.
Can I just ask one thing? A lot of the media have been asking whether Charles is going to be a good king. Two things. So firstly, what makes a good king? And do you think Charles is going to be one?
What makes a good king? Well, that is how long have you got?
Well, I haven't got very long.
Well, that's me just trying to think of an answer. In essence, do what he's doing. Don't rock the boat. Be there as just a steady hand on the tiller. That was the point of the Queen, and that is what he wants to make sure happens, that he doesn't rock the boat. He keeps the country, in the main, on side with him. Look, there are going to be dissenting voices, but looking at the way he's approached it is as steady as you go. We know he's got strong views on certain things, but he knows he has to be careful how he says it. But basically, if he carries on doing what he's doing so far, he should be all right, and will be leaving the monarchy and the ultimate thing for his son. And that moment in the Abbey yesterday was a testament to the constitution of the monarchy and what it means. Not the individual, it's the institution that's important for this country.
Absolutely. Rupert, thank you very much indeed. That's Rupert Bell, our Talk Radio's royal correspondent. Right, it is now time for Tech Rundown.
Tech Rundown.
Let's hop, skip and jump, shall we, over to Sydney in Australia. Davis Fang joins us there, our tech presenter. Good, I never remember what it is. Evening. Are you there, Davis?
Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Nice haircut.
Hey.
Thank you very much. I'm just celebrating the coronation here as well, like with everyone else.
So that's really interesting, actually. How did you celebrate the coronation down under?
Yeah, so what I did basically was deck my car out with these flags all over it. I'm not sure if the passers-by really appreciated it, though.
And were there celebrations in Sydney for the coronation? Of course, a Commonwealth country, very close ties indeed to the United Kingdom.
Yes, I would say overall Australia is fairly positive about the monarchy. Therefore, there were a few little parties here and there, but nothing too outrageous.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Right, let's move on to tech now. So your first story this morning is General Motors ditching Apple CarPlay. Talk us through that.
Yes, it's a big thing. So it's hard to believe that it's almost been 9 years since Apple CarPlay was unveiled, and since then it's on basically every car, apart from Tesla's. Am I right?
I don't have it on my car, no.
Yeah, so, but since then, like, basically every car from Vauxhalls to Rolls-Royces have had CarPlay. However, GM has recently announced that they're going to ditch it on their future electric cars. And that's caused a little bit of a splash, because they're claiming that, their in-house infotainment people can make a better experience than both Apple and Google. But unfortunately, from their past attempts, that is definitely not the case at all. So basically what Ford is saying now, which is GM's main competitor, is that Google and Apple are so ahead of them, and there's not that much money to be made with their in-car infotainments, that they just basically give it in to Apple and Google. But I'm just wondering, do you feel like that you're missing out by not having CarPlay, David?
Well, I don't really know what it is, to be honest. No, so obviously not. I mean, just in terms of their market share, is this not a very odd move for those people who actually do enjoy having Apple CarPlay?
Yeah, it's an incredibly odd move. I think Ford said that 70% of their users are Apple users and also use CarPlay. So to take that out of, your feature list, it's just an incredibly odd move by GM, especially if it's going to be replaced by something that's probably worse.
Yeah, very, very odd. I don't know who's in charge of marketing there, but anyway, thank you for that. Now, this is about Apple Store workers, this next story. really interesting, this, because we were talking earlier with Caroline Faraday, talking about the writers and the fact that the US is very unionised, and certainly the writers is very unionised. This story is about unions as well in Maryland.
Yes, funnily enough, that's true. So there's tons of things in the US that baffle, us foreigners. Things like, their gun laws, their... and most of all, I would say their tipping culture. And so there's an Apple store in Maryland, and they've basically unionized against the wishes of a lot of people, I'm sure. And they're basically asking for the typical stuff like pay rises, more benefits, stuff like that. But the most controversial thing of all is that they're asking for tips. I mean, the last thing that I want to do when I'm paying for a $5,000 MacBook is to give an extra 20% to, whoever grabbed it from the stockroom for me.
It's extraordinary. How on earth do they think...
culture gone...
well, I know,
crazy.
and that is such a cultural difference. And when I lived in the States, it was so difficult to get through my head that you basically put 20% on everything. And then lots of people say, well, this is unacceptable because I'm already paying, as you rightly say, I'm paying all this money for a meal or whatever it is. But the fact is they don't pay their staff as well. But I agree, I don't see how anyone would tip if you're buying a phone.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. Apparently they will. They're planning on sharing the tips among all the employees. But the thing is, Apple employees, even in retail, do get paid reasonably in the US, so there's no need for it. And if this culture were to continue, could you imagine buying, I don't know, a used 10-year-old Corsa from a used car salesman and then having to tip 30% on top of that? It's just the most outrageous thing, and I hope that they do fail on that front.
The trouble is this as well. It becomes then an expectation, doesn't it? It's rather so service. And there's one of the big things I bang on about is that we're losing service everywhere, and often in restaurants you go and it says service not included, and they're not joking. Sometimes it is awful.
You have to get it yourself.
It is true. Yeah. But I think if you suddenly expect a tip when you buy this iPhone, whatever, you're going to basically give worse service if you don't get it, aren't you? And it's not going to be a good start. I think it's a slippery slope.
I think it is too. Let's move on and talk about passwords. This is the bane of everyone's life, where you're asked for your password and again and you can't remember it, and there are so many passwords. So this is about Google. What's going to happen in terms of this?
Yeah, like with us, I'm sure that Google knows as well that passwords are absolutely terrible. You forget them, you need a new password for everything. And then in some workplaces, like my one, you have to change your password every 6 months, and it needs to be completely different to the last one, which just makes it absolutely impossible. So basically, Google is working on getting rid of them for good. And they're starting with something called passkeys. And this is something that's going to be universal among Apple, among Microsoft, among Google. So this might actually gain some traction. So the idea is that instead of using a password to log into Gmail and stuff like that, you instead use what you use to unlock your phone, like either your face or your fingerprint. And this will basically kill the password for good. Hopefully, it sort of acts like the one-time SMS codes that you often get from certain apps. And if this becomes the future, then oh my God, I finally don't need to remember the thousands of random passwords that my dad suddenly expects me to remember for some reason.
Well, no, but also, so that's fine for phones, I get that, because you've got fingerprint technology. But what about computers? Because many people, have older computers, for example, that don't have fingerprints.
That is true. However, a lot of computers are starting to get fingerprints.
Oh, I think we've lost
Ultimately,
it.
this will live alongside... Yeah, this will happen alongside passwords and replace them for most situations rather than replacing them altogether.
So I think the narrative as well is it's a wrong headline. You're not losing passwords. You're getting a much more digital way of doing things. Yeah. It makes sense. It's crazy to have several different passwords. Use the iris of your eye in the same way as they're doing for passports and so on and so forth. That's the way to do it. You're not losing security measures, because when you first hear that headline, you think, oh my goodness, that's crazy. You're losing a password. You're losing an old analog way of doing things. Digital is the way to go. It makes sense. You've got your fingerprints, you've got your iris, you've got your face. Work on that principle.
And also, it seems odd to me where computers remember remember all your passwords. That doesn't seem to be very security.
This is all
conscious, does
or you write
Yeah.
it down because you're not quite sure what they are.
I actually have, well, anyway, I won't tell you what I've done with my passwords, but I have written them down, basically.
Thank you.
I mean, no, I literally have. You mentioned Gmail there, Davis, but also Gmail.
Yes.
What's this about verification marks?
Well, I think this is just hilarious timing because obviously everyone's getting into the blue checkmark game these days. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and now even Gmail is getting blue checkmarks. But I think this is actually a really good thing. So basically what Google is doing is giving certain company emails a blue checkmark just to confirm that it is indeed a genuine email that it's being sent from. So that will definitely reduce the chance of people being victims to phishing scams and stuff like that. And basically, it will appear for every email that goes through Google's BIMI, or brand indicators for message identification. And I think the reason why this is just a bit of a news story is because of the very, very awkward timing. But overall, it's quite a good thing.
Yeah, interesting. So do the big companies have to pay for this verification mark? There's been a lot, of course, with Twitter, that people lost their blue check marks. Then you had to buy it. Also, is that the same sort of thing that's going to happen with this?
I don't think so. Google's ultimately an advertising company, but who knows? They might change it. But I think right now it's just a way to fix the massive phishing problem that is happening right now.
Yeah, very interesting. There's a lot of chatter about Twitter, actually, in the blue checks.
Oh, absolutely. I like our mutual friend, Carol Decker from Tapao.
Oh, good morning, Carol. I know
we
who's
love
watching.
Carol.
Yes,
It's very good.
morning,
She
Carol.
never misses an episode, is what she said. But what she's done, rather than having a blue tick, she's done a little blue heart. So your mind thinks she's already got the blue tick, and you can basically cut and
you've got a
copy
blue
and paste.
diamond.
I've got a blue diamond.
I
Well
saw.
spotted. I thank you.
Yes, that's clever.
Very clever. So you can do that, and it fools the eye into thinking that you're.
Well, and also, let me just ask you, David, so it's a bit unfair because you didn't know I was going to ask you this, but just in terms of Twitter, if you have a blue mark and you change your photo, and I didn't know this, you lose your mark. You lose it for over a week.
Yes, I think that's the case with Instagram and Facebook as well. I think that's basically to reduce the chance of people selling their verified accounts to other people, and just to give them another chance to confirm your identification. So although it's inconvenient, it's probably a good thing.
OK, fair enough. We were going to talk about a flip phone, but I think time has beaten us very sadly. Dave, it's very good to see you and your union flag there in Sydney, Australia. And that was today's Tech Rundown.
Tech Rundown.
Well, there we are. The time, 9:43 on Sunday, May the 7th. Time for a quick break. After the break, it's your turn once again. It's your calls, your thoughts and your messages. This is Talk TV. Welcome back to the final part of Weekend Breakfast with me, David Bull. I'm joined by Andrew Eborn all morning. Have you enjoyed it?
I have loved it.
Good.
It's been such a joy being Renee for a day.
Dr. Renee, indeed.
Renee for a day.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. You've provided much needed light.
It was. Can I just say one thing? First of all, I talked about yesterday being absolutely brilliant. Your preparation,
need to be near your mic,
your
by the way.
preparation for that was phenomenal. And one of the joys was seeing your Twitter feed, was seeing you in your underwear.
It wasn't my underwear.
Not showing the crown jewels, but you had poster sticks everywhere. It was a delight.
The point is that actually I prepared very thoroughly indeed for the coronation. So I actually went through all of these notes. We were sent really good briefing notes, and I learnt so much about it. And actually I was quite stressed about it. There was so much to get through. And then I took this picture, which you can now see. I think that's quite enough of that. And everyone has commented on that about my obsession with highlighters, and everyone knows that I am obsessed with highlighters, and I think it's a great. Yeah, there's enough of that photo. But actually, I learnt so much about the coronation by learning.
For me, that was one of the highlights. It's just hearing, apart from your photo, it's just hearing so many facts. And to speak for that many hours, but actually to impart so much information. And what you did, in the sense of that wonderful balance, that fusion of solemnity with a bit of frivolity as well. And it was a glorious fusion. I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It was fun to do. It was really thrilling, and actually an historic event as well. So just brilliant. Stephen is in Torbay on the line. Good morning to you.
Good morning, David. Enjoying your show as usual.
Thank you very much. How kind.
And I'm surprised you haven't got Dr. Renee today, but Andrew's another blonde that...
Well, he is indeed. Dr. Renee basically has run away because obviously we didn't do this show yesterday because I had coronation breakfast. So Dr. Renee is sunning herself somewhere in Spain.
Oh, very good.
Well, I know. It's all right for some, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, I was just going to mention that the two Future Politics panel guys you had, Charlie and Adam, I think.
Charlie and Jonathan.
Conversation. Sorry, yes. Charlie made some particularly good points about the controlling demand on housing for young people, because with all the immigration, obviously there's competition for housing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's right. I mean, just in terms of that story, I mean, Labour pledging to put in new housing targets, I think it's very strange for the Conservatives to row back and say, actually, I see what they're doing. They're trying to shore up their base support and saying we're not going to build on the Greenbelt. And I think most people don't really want the Greenbelt built on. But the question is, what is Greenbelt? And some of it's not very green. And then also you've got, you know, there's space for, what was it, 1.2 million homes on brownfield sites. How would you... I mean, clearly there's a problem with the housing crisis. How would you solve it? What would you like to see?
Well, the first thing I would do, we've got a problem. Our economy over the last decades has been financialised, so money can move in and out of the country easily. So what we need to do is to somehow encourage investors to invest in infrastructure and housing in the UK. And really, to be honest, we've got to have a return of capital controls that we had in the 1980s.
But isn't the issue also that we actually need to have a favourable tax regime? Because actually the problem is that many of these multinationals are thinking, well, if you're going to tax us this highly, we're going to Ireland.
Yes, that's exactly the point, isn't it? And I think, and you make such a good point as well. If you need to see the money flow, and it's what we said beforehand, and actually the lower the tax rate, the more people will come in here and the more revenue that's raised. If you overtax people, they're going to disappear.
And Stephen, where do you sit on the tax that these corporates are paying? Do you think it's just, or do you think actually we need to rethink this and try and... Well, you're very keen, obviously, to have inward investment into the United Kingdom.
Not necessarily inward investment. If you think about the Victorian era, all our philanthropists were rich entrepreneurs.
They were indeed.
They reinvested into the UK. But with this globalisation, it's a race to the bottom on tax rates.
Right. So how would you get entrepreneurs in this country to invest in this country?
Well, by bringing back capital controls, and therefore we would keep the money here in the UK.
And so what do you mean by capital controls?
Well, we had them in the 1980s, whereby, for example, if you went abroad on holiday, I remember you could only take £150 out with your passport in one go. So we had serious restrictions. But post-war, we had a vibrant, productive economy. But we've lost it all because capital has gone to where labour's cheapest, China and the Far East.
Interesting points. Thoughts, Andrew?
Well, I think that you absolutely have to look at it, and this is where you need to compete. The workforce of the world, like China and then India, is incredibly cheaper than over here. You look at that sort of stuff. So all of these make sense. What I also need to look at, you need to look at the whole economy. How we do taxing. I mentioned earlier when we were talking to the brilliant guest that you had earlier on your political panel, we need to look at things like inheritance tax. We need to look at how we can look after our older population.
I totally agree with that. I don't know where you stand on that, Stephen. Inheritance tax, I think it's very iniquitous. You've already paid tax all your life, and most people end up with maybe a house at the end of it. That's to show for your hard work, and then we get taxed again with death duties.
Yes, I think you've got a point there on inheritance tax. There is no incentive for people to save or to buy their own home, because when you get to old age, and I'm pretty near there now, they'll use your house as a piggy bank. You don't get benefits, you don't get pension credit, so your house becomes the government's piggy bank.
Well, I agree. I actually think this is a massive political issue for lots of older people, and I think it is iniquitous.
And it also divides families, because what happens at the moment, you have your 300-odd grand, you get tax-free, but if you have this big asset...
325, isn't it?
Exactly, but you have this big asset, which is sometimes worth millions. If you don't get rid of that and start divesting yourself, so families try to encourage their older parents to give it to them or whatever, and it causes so much division and nervousness in families. It's an inequity. We need to basically address this to make sure we look after our older population.
There's also another disparity. If you're single, of course, you get £325,000 allowance, but if you're a married couple, you get £650,000. That can't be right, can it, Stephen?
Well, no, I think this is another problem. Aspiration. If you work hard, you pay a mortgage, pay off your home, you should be able to keep it. The problem is now the benefit system is catching up with us, and now you're not much better off if you have a modest home, wherever you are in the country.
It's a brilliant point. You have to incentivise people. We touched on this earlier. Incentivise people to be successful. If you have that willingness to work, you're going to get out there, and there are things that you can do. Encourage people to do that. Encourage people to make money and embrace success.
Absolutely. Stephen, thank you very much indeed. You made some brilliant points there. Right. That's Stephen in Torbay there. Actually, this goes back to a conversation we had right at the beginning of the programme about Britain, and we talk about in the US about people celebrating their success, so that when you meet someone in the US, they say, oh my goodness, I'm an award-winning scientist, or whatever they do. Yes. We don't do that, actually, and we should celebrate success. So when you say, actually, I've got a first from a university or whatever, most people would moan, but actually we should say, it's fantastic.
We have soundbite politics where we talk about make Britain great again, and the reality is we should celebrate the greatness, not just for our great nation, but also for ourselves. We have a fantastic population of very talented, multi-talented people. Embrace that success and trumpet that success.
Well, I agree, and actually on this show we had a segment called The Best of Britain, and this was about celebrating normal people, working people around the country who do extraordinary things. I don't think we do that enough, actually.
No, you're absolutely... It's a great segment. In fact, you were talking about Badminton. Eleanor Tomlinson, who's the artist who did Paddington and the Queen, is down at Badminton. She's down there with her stuff.
She's a great example.
Fantastic
so this young girl who made that amazing cartoon of the Queen, I believe,
with Paddington,
Paddington and the corgis and all that.
And she's now done the new Coronation capers, and now they've done deals for her around the world, in Japan, and that sort of stuff, helping with the licensing. Embrace that.
But how do we change the mindset?
It would.
But how do we change the mindset of British people?
We have a few people who can be the poster girls and poster boys, showing that success is something we do embrace. We are the best in the world. We need to tell the world we're the greatest at doing it. But encourage people. Don't resent success. It's a strange mindset.
But where's it coming from? The parents? The schools?
I imagine there's a bit of British reservedness, which means, which partly it's cultural, isn't it, to a great extent. You turn around and say, we don't talk about things. We are pretty reserved as people. When we express our joy, you barely raise an eyebrow. You can have that sort of stuff. We should encourage people to be proud to be British, be proud to celebrate our successes and tell the world about it.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right, and we do. I mean, yesterday was a great example of that. People absolutely celebrating the monarch and everything that this country stands for. The fact is we are a country built on tradition, as we saw in that coronation service. The fact is that it's been the same since 1066, pretty much. 40 monarchs crowned in Westminster Abbey. I mean, so it is about celebrating the best of Britain in the past, but also looking forward and saying, look, actually, we need to now move forward and have an even better country.
Absolutely. Carry on building on the great success that we've had and celebrate that success.
Indeed. Talking of success.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Tice.
Talk of these being the same, I think your waistcoat may have been at the original Coronation. That's been the same. I'm so rude, I know. I'm so sorry.
Very rude indeed. At least I got into the spirit of things.
Absolutely. I absolutely been.
You've got a Union Jack on.
Exactly. Well, I always have a Union Jack on.
I know you do. You do.
I wear that with
but
great
I've got my
pride.
tie and everything.
You have. No, you look splendid. I mean, you look splendid yesterday, and I know you've done really well getting through the show this morning, because I know yesterday was a joyous day for you throughout the whole day, David.
Well, no, not throughout the whole day. I have to say I was very good and did go home before the rest of the team. But yes, we were. I mean, it was a brilliant day, though. Wasn't it?
It was absolutely outstanding, and it was just some of it brought tears to my eyes, actually. And I don't cry often, but there was certain moments, and I'll be talking about that throughout the show, and just some of the pictures in the newspapers. This is a day to buy a couple of newspapers, keep them for your grandchildren. Just remarkable.
Yeah,
truly remarkable.
And I keep referring to this, the Sun's front page, for example, the weight of office. I mean, I found it really touching, actually.
Oh, completely. And, I mean, he looks very sombre, but actually, I thought the King... it was just amazing, and he was very humble. There was tremendous humility. The picture,
and then the picture, absolutely over here as well. On the Sunday Times.
I know,
isn't that glorious? I mean, you work on that sort of basis.
No,
and it's the perfect partnership. We talked about the Queen and Philip beforehand, and what a great double act they are, or were. I think Camilla and Charles will be the next great double act.
Absolutely right. They will be the great double act. I thought the emotion between the King and the Prince of Wales at that key moment was quite extraordinary. I did wonder whether he was whispering, "I love you, my son," or whether he was whispering, "Where's Harry?" But anyway.
and the answer was next to Prince Andrew, is what he said.
Well, you are causing mischief now. Just very quickly, anything else
so we're also going to be talking about the local elections. I've got John Redwood MP on to talk about that. Seems that a sort of a war breaking out over house building between different parts of the Tory party.
Yeah, very much.
Where's the affordable housing for the young? So we've got to look forward.
And we've talked about that this morning.
And the thing is, if we can do this so well, and I'm going to be talking about it in my Sunday sermon, then actually, why can't we run other parts of the state, our public services, so well? And I think I've got the answer.
Well, it's because the military aren't involved, so that's why.
Exactly, and that's what I'm going to be talking about. So people will wind a few people
That's really interesting. I mean, when we put our minds to things, we do them brilliantly. I mean, the military precision, the detail. I got sent the briefing document from the Ministry of Defence. I mean, it is extraordinary. It goes into such detail about everything.
But there's a couple of things. You have actually got to show up. You can't do this stuff from home.
Right.
And
great point.
You've got to have a bit of discipline. And occasionally, a sergeant major probably is going to raise his voice at you.
Well, yes.
Very much and that's how you get some performance along the way.
Absolutely.
And incentivise success, which is the other thing that we talked about.
And that rounds off the show beautifully. We've come back to where we started. Thank you very much. Hope you have a brilliant show, Richard. I'm sure it will be excellent. Thank you to you, Andrew.
A real pleasure.
It's been a great pleasure. Obviously, people have missed Dr. Renee.
Renee for a day. That's what I want.
Renee for a day, yes. No, thank you very much indeed. And also for all your tips and your thoughts on futurology, actually. Really interesting. The rise of AI, I think, is really quite...
Back to the Futurist. We do it regularly.
Yes, indeed, indeed. Thank you very much indeed for your company as well. I'm back tomorrow with breakfast. This is Talk TV, broadcasting from Central London.